Remember, during the Devonian period, life is indeed booming in the ocean. All this little world proliferates in the warm, luminous waters without thinking for a second that things are about to change radically. At the end of the Devonian, however, a great extinction struck the planet once again. The first had taken place in the Ordovician, geological and climatic changes and other upheavals due to major terrestrial activity wiped out thousands of marine species. Contrary to popular belief, this extinction was progressive rather than brutal and radical. It took place over tens of thousands of years, but the consequences are there for all to see. 75% of marine animals have disappeared. At that time, the Earth was occupied by a single continent, located at the South Pole, while a string of islands and archipelagos stretched out at the equator. All the rest was just an immense ocean. On land, life was almost non-existent, apart from near the coast and in wetlands. A few insects and a few tetrapodomorphs tried their hand at life on land, but nothing had yet been gained for these first settlers. It has to be said that the environment at the end of the Devonian was still rather hostile, and conditions were not really ripe for the arrival of living creatures. At the gateway to the Carboniferous, the situation is still much the same. Life on land is still a long way off. Under the ocean, on the other hand, life is beginning to reassert itself and adapt to the various changes. As has been the case since our first voyages in the Cambrian, life is rich and abundant once again. Sponges, corals, brachiopods, nautiloids, and of course fish of all kinds enjoy this new underwater haven. Let's take a look at a typical Carboniferous seascape. What plant and animal species inhabit this underwater setting? First of all, as you now know, the epicontinental sea that formed in the Carboniferous favored the creation of a new biotope. The waters here are shallow, 200 meters or 700 feet at most. But this region of the ocean benefits from the sun's luminosity and warmth. Corals quickly establish themselves here. Everything is in place to encourage their growth. Whether solitary or colonial, they build extensive reefs in the warm waters of the Paleothis. These in turn encourage the expansion of other species. Brachiopods such as this Productus greatly appreciate this marine region. It lives and feeds on the seabed. The small spines that can be seen in the dorsal valve are not a defensive weapon against predators. For that, the shell is the only protection it has. The spines, on the other hand, are useful for holding on tightly to the bottom. In brachiopods, these spines can be more or less prominent, depending on whether the substrate is muddy or hard. The genus Productus was quite diverse in the Carboniferous. Here we see a Productus giganteus, here a Productus subaculeatus, and over there a Productus cora or a Productus punctatus. The giganteus is undoubtedly the most exceptional of these. Scientists believe it to be the largest brachiopoda ever to have lived on our planet. It could reach 30 to 35 centimeters, or 13 inches. Like the other members of its group, it naturally occupies the seabed, preferring shallow, muddy waters. Aside from this preferred location, this brachiopod adapts to all regions. It can be found in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Buried in sand or mud, its imposing size, weight, and sturdy spines give it great stability in the water. Waves do not prevent it from remaining firmly attached to its substrate. Unable to move, this sessile animal has a diet adapted to its own physical limitations. It feeds by filtration to extract suspended phytoplankton. For this reason, it settles in shallow waters that take full advantage of the sun's rays. Its favorite food, phytoplankton, thrives here. To extract these planktonic particles, it uses an organ called a lophophore. The lophophore surrounds the mouth. It's a highly efficient system, a real collector of suspended particles. The lophophore is made up of tentacles and can take on a variety of shapes: ring-shaped, horseshoe-shaped, or coiled. It's hollow and silated, so it can catch particles. One problem with being fixed is reproduction. In Gigantea, scientists believe that gametes are released into the water column. Other suspension-feeding sessile animals are the blastoids, notably the yellow blastoid, such as Orphiocrinus, and the crinoids, such as the red crinoid. Let's start with the blastoids. These are part of the so-called Echinoderms. The echinoderm is characterized by a body protected by a set of interlocking, firmly welded limestone plates. These plates form what is known as a theca, a hard, mineralized, very solid envelope. In these animals, the mouth is in the center, but all around it, like petals around a flower pistil, are mouth depressions. These have two important roles to play. Firstly, they support the filtering organs called brachioles. Secondly, they also contain the animal's respiratory pores. This is not the only echinoderm present here. Another member of this group evolves very close to our blastoid. Do you notice it? It has a very distinct shape and blends in so well with the scenery that you could walk right past it without thinking for a second that it's an animal. In fact, it looks more like a plant, but if you get a little closer, you'll see that it's actually a marine animal with an articulated limestone skeleton. It also has a kind of root to anchor itself to the ground, and a calyx with long, flexible arms to filter the plankton it feeds on from the water. Or should we say, feed on in the plural, since they rarely live in isolation from one another. Have these precious clues put you on the right track? This famous echinoderm, the king of camouflage, is a crinoid, and more precisely, right in front of us is a red crinoid. The filtration system of crinoids is quite different from that of blastoids. They filter seawater by fanning out their arms. They then transport the plankton to their mouths by means of tiny cilia covering the arms. These cilia are called pinnules. Depending on the species, the arms can measure up to 50 centimeters or 20 inches long. Here we can estimate a length of 30 centimeters or 12 inches. Unlike other parts of its body, the crinoid's pinnules are soft. They are the only part of the body without a calcified skeleton, to ensure flexibility of movement and therefore perfect optimization of filtration. And as if that weren't enough, to be sure of winning every time, these pinnules secrete a sticky glue. A formidable plankton magnet, this ability enables it to find food in abundance in this sunny part of the ocean. But in the sea there are still a multitude of animals of all shapes and sizes to be discovered. Take this mollusk, for example. It's a cephalopod, to be precise. You may remember that this genus, the Gonianites, diversified greatly during the Devonian. This continued into the Carboniferous. In fact, this is the period when they developed and diversified the most. Gonianites are marine animals with shells. Their shells are highly distinctive. Unlike others, they have several chambers within the shell, separated by zigzag-shaped sutures. If you look closely, you can see that one of these chambers is larger than the others. This is where the cephalopod lives. But the other chambers, while not used as living quarters, do have their uses. Each of them, filled with gas, plays a hydrostatic role. Thanks to this physical property, Gonianites can swim in open water and maintain a pressure balance as required. They are said to be nectonic. Unlike plankton, nekton can swim, even against the current. On the other hand, they are far from being able to compete with fish. They are not equipped for fast swimming, nor are they renowned for any particular skill. But that doesn't seem to bother him in the least. He's adapted to his condition and sets off in search of food. Sight is his guide. The cephalopod has two rather well-developed eyes. It also has tentacles, no doubt useful for feeding. This, at least, is the hypothesis put forward by paleobiologists. In fact, despite the few fossils in the possession of museums, scientists are faced with an unanswered question when it comes to the lifestyle and diet of Gonianites. There are no sufficiently convincing clues that these animals had a benthic lifestyle, for example. There is very little evidence to support a reliable hypothesis about the diet of Gonianites. The only thing we can be sure of is that they lacked the calcified, beaked jaws of some of their relatives. We can therefore rule out hard-shelled and shell-bearing animals from their diet. While many marine species take advantage of these shallow waters to diversify, some are in decline. The number of marine arthropods has fallen drastically. This is particularly true of trilobites. But some are luckier than others. Some arthropods, for the time being at least, endure despite the difficulties facing the genus. This is a megarachne, a eurypterid. Aquatic or semi-aquatic, we don't really know. It measures nearly 60 centimeters or 24 inches when its legs are extended. But we'll meet it a little later in the trip. Not far away, a little deeper, we should be able to spot other marine species. As we were saying, marine animals come in all shapes and sizes. As you can see, the corals are home to quite different species from what we've seen so far. This time, no shells, no calcified skeletons either, but fins. Look, here we are in front of a shoal of Uranothes. They seem to enjoy swimming in the midst of these days of yellow blastoids and red crinoids undulating in the current. Unfortunately for these fish, they'll have to postpone their nautical activities and think about protecting themselves quickly from the approaching predator. The mastodon you see now is a member of the Stephacanthus genus. If we have doubts about the diet of the Gonianites, we know pretty well the diet of the predator that will follow, Acmonistion zangrelli. Stephacanthus is an extinct genus of primitive, Holocephalus. It is one of the first cartilaginous fish to have lived on our planet, along with Cladocelicae and Gladbachus. This makes it one of the oldest sharks on the planet. But this prestigious title doesn't seem to dampen his ardor. He's on the hunt. Stethocanthus is a predator that thrives in both fresh and salt water, where we also find ourselves. Measuring up to 2 meters or 7 feet for the largest, it is quite similar to our contemporary sharks. Its name means anvil shark. As you can imagine, this name is inspired by its distinctive morphology. You can clearly see the anvil-shaped fin on its back. However, this is not the case for females. Only the males display this prominence. Why did males have this distinctive dorsal fin? There are 2 possibilities. The first suggests that it was used to attract the attention of females. The second suggests that it was an advantage for males when they had to fight each other to establish their position and conquer a female. This primitive shark lived in shallow waters, mainly coastal areas. It feeds on crustaceans and mollusks, but also on fish. Contrary to popular belief, not all cartilaginous animals are sharks, nor are they all large fish. To understand this, let's go a little deeper into the ocean. The fish we're about to meet are particularly fond of the deep sea. Here we can observe a school of Falcatus, another Holocephalus. It has very large eyes. Do you know why? It's very dark here. We're no longer in the photic part of the ocean. These big eyes are very useful for seeing clearly in such darkness. It also has a homocercal tail fin. The caudal fin is located at the rear end of the fish. There are 4 forms of caudal fin. The homocercal form means that it is symmetrical with 2 equal lobes. The caudal fin is remarkably well developed in Falcatus. In other words, he must have been an outstanding swimmer. The shrimps that move here and there will undoubtedly serve as his breakfast. He loves these little creatures. Before leaving, did you notice anything else peculiar about him? The thorn. You're probably wondering what that thorn on his back is for. Is it really just for shrimping? No, it's something else. Like our previous shark, Falcatus also has a very distinctive sexual dimorphism. Only males have this dorsal fin, with a sort of spine projecting forward. Now it's time to head back up to the light. It's nice to be back in a more familiar landscape, illuminated by the sun's rays breaking through the surface. We see corals, algae, echinoderms, blastoids, and many other small marine animals. Suddenly, the ocean is much more welcoming and reassuring. A few mollusks, crustaceans, and a variety of small fish wander through this thriving ecosystem. But small prey galore also means predators on the prowl. One of them is approaching, and the weaker ones are already panicking. They're right to be scared. There are big marine predators in the Carboniferous. Here it comes. This one belongs to the genus Chondrichthyans, i.e. cartilaginous fishes, and to the group of elasmobranchs that include sharks, rays, and sawfish in the order Selaceae. Unlike sharks, it does not belong to the Selaceae order, but to the Tenacanthiform, which means dragon shark. Sharks and dragon sharks have much in common, including 5 to 7 pairs of gill slits opening individually outwards, rigid dorsal fins, and small, placoid scales on the skin. The major difference between the two lies in the dorsal fins. These are made up of spines. The spines on the fins of Dracopristis, the specimen in front of us, were very large, measuring just over 55 centimeters or 22 inches long, i.e. around 25% of the total body length. Lurking at the bottom of the water, Dracopristis had to watch its back and protect itself from danger. Semi-buried in the ground, it can easily be attacked by a more powerful and imposing predator, such as Glycmanius occidentalis. Thanks to its famous prominent spines, it can counter attacks. The surprise effect when the predator rubs against the thorn in its mouth can give Dracopristis a few seconds to react. Dentition and mouth opening also present some distinctions between Selachi and Tenacanthiform, or if you prefer to call them that, between sharks and dragon sharks. Let's take the dentition of Dracopristis as a control for our comparative study. Its teeth are adapted to seize and crush its prey. The dentition consists of a long blade-like tooth, surrounded by numerous short fork-like teeth. It has 12 rows of teeth. Its teeth are designed to catch food and swallow it whole. There's no room for chance. The victim has very little chance of escaping alive. Sharks also have several rows of teeth, but they have a different shape, and there aren't several small teeth around a large blade, as here. The opening of this lethal weapon is also larger in Tenacanthiform, i.e. in Dracopristis, than in sharks. On the other hand, it is less flexible. Many sharks inhabit the ocean. We've already seen several types, as well as closely related creatures. Sharks appeared much earlier, in the Ordovician period, but they never managed to make their mark against other predators. The Carboniferous period is known as the Golden Age of Sharks. It was their extinction at the end of the Devonian period that allowed them to become the kings of the ocean. The extinction, so to speak, cleaned up the big predators. A vacant spot in the ocean was quickly filled by the shark group. They were then able to dominate the marine waters and give birth to a whole variety of forms as they diversified. While all the species we've seen so far live underwater, others haven't managed to choose between land and sea. Amphibians, or at least some of them, seem to enjoy both environments without distinction. It's with them that we'll be making our transition from aquatic to terrestrial life. We'll be taking our first steps on land, but for some time to come, we'll be avoiding going deeper into the continent. It's too early to survive in these distant lands. The forest hasn't hatched yet. It's dormant. It's getting ready. In the meantime, let's continue our journey along the coast and through the swamps. How did amphibians come to divide themselves between two worlds? By the end of the Devonian period, we had witnessed a major radiation of fish. Several hypotheses have been put forward as to the causes of these changes and evolutions. For them, answering the call of the continent had become inevitable for a number of reasons. Scientists point to two main plausible causes: to protect themselves from new predators, notably sharks, and to get around in waterways where the water level is very low and the tangle of branches and roots greatly hinders movement. Don't forget that the forest is gradually but surely taking root. For the moment, it can only do so in wetlands. This is a good thing for life on the mainland, but it does make things difficult for some fish. To get out of this predicament, these swimmers are starting to develop legs. Of course, at first, they're more like pseudopterans, but the machine has been set in motion. Without this evolution, there would probably be no amphibians, reptiles, birds, or even mammals on Earth. The appearance of legs brought with it a veritable revolution in the animals that would soon populate our planet. Alongside legs, the ability to breathe out of water was also discussed. Without this ability, walking on land would have been utopian. Sarcopterygians, bony fish with a swim bladder, a lung in short, are going to divert this organ from its original purpose. Initially dedicated to maintaining equilibrium in the water, lungs can now also be used to breathe the oxygen contained in the air. Nevertheless, these animals of a different kind still need the aquatic environment to live. Exclusive terrestrial life has not yet been fully conquered. The question of reproduction and the fragility of the egg, for example, is one of the reasons why exclusive terrestrial life is impossible. That's where we left off in our investigations at this stage in the evolutionary process of fish and pre-amphibians at the end of the Devonian. Let's resume our study of this conquest of the land with the now much more developed amphibians of the Carboniferous. The amphibians of this period are known as stegocephali, meaning head with plates. We're going to have to find them. Their morphology is quite remarkable, but they also know how to blend into the background. Let's start with a rather terrestrial animal, which we're sure will be easier to flesh out. This is Balaenoptera woody. It feeds on insects. We should be able to find them in the vegetation cover near this stream. Well, here's one. It's barely 20 centimeters or 8 inches long, but you can clearly see its long body, legs, and head. It's precisely at the back of its head that it has a large tympanic opening. This means that its hearing is well developed, even in the open air. Unlike some specimens found at the end of the Devonian period, our Balaenoptera has very strong bones. He's quite capable of supporting his weight and his movements out of the water. He looks like a salamander. His head, rather round and flat, but also his posture, give him this apparent resemblance. It has around 40 teeth on its upper jaw and 20 on its lower, making it an accomplished carnivore. Insects are its favorite diet. It was one of the first temnospondyls. This group has long withstood the many changes on our planet, and even certain biological crises. It survived until the Cretaceous period, when it was present on Earth for almost 220 million years. They lived much longer than the dinosaurs, for example, which are often used as a benchmark for comparing longevity. Let's continue our exploration. We're approaching a swamp. Unlike the first, this one has no legs. It lost them as it evolved. This may seem totally implausible to you, but tetrapods have repeatedly lost and regained their limbs over the course of biological evolution. Life knows how to adapt when necessary. Tetrapods are no exception. But let's get back to the swamp and the animal we're concerned with. It's an Ophidierpeton. It looks more like a snake and is quite long, close to 70 centimeters or 28 inches when fully grown. Now that you've got his picture in your head, you shouldn't miss him. Yes, it's really him, Ophidierpeton brownrigi. It has no fewer than 230 vertebrae. His large forward-facing eyes guide his hunt. He hides in the hollow of a burrow and comes out when hunger strikes. Insects, worms, millipedes, anything of reasonable size will fit in its mouth. Other amphibians also live in the area, but you have to leave the marshy area and approach the lake to catch a glimpse of them. You'll see that this body of fresh water is also teeming with life. This is Microbrachus. He too looks like a salamander. However, it has a total of 40 vertebrae and short limbs. This skeleton is not conducive to swimming. It does, however, manage with a body undulation system. It's not fast, but the technique is effective. In addition to the salamander, Microbrachus also closely resembles the axolotl. Do you notice the little membranes on the sides of its head? These are the remains of its larval gills. He keeps them as an adult. A little further on, we can see Amphibianus grandiceps. This time, at first glance, it's clear that it belongs to the amphibian group. The body is stockier and the head more triangular. It measures around 20 centimeters or 8 inches. When you look at its skeleton, it's easy to see how it can move. Its legs and long clawed toes help it to move on the ground. In the water, it's the tail that stands out. It's shaped like an oar and becomes a precious asset for getting around in open water. So it has two possible means of locomotion. He juggles between one and the other according to his needs. I'd like you to ask yourself about these two possibilities. Why live both in the water and on land? They have legs and lungs, so why don't they conquer the ground out of wetlands, lakes, rivers, and swamps? Every animal ability in nature has an origin, a raison d'être. If these animals preserve their aquatic and terrestrial abilities, it's for a good reason. The survival of a species depends on more than the availability of food. Without food, there is no energy. Without energy, the body withers and dies. But the survival of a species also depends on its ability to reproduce. It must be able to reproduce under the right conditions and multiply births so that the younger generation replaces the older. But for these animals, nothing is simple at the moment. Without the aquatic environment, embryos cannot survive. Another major revolution is now underway to counter this problem facing nature, the amniotic egg. To understand this revolution, we need to take a closer look at the amniotic egg. Here's a Hylonomus laeli, quite similar to our present-day lizards, and one of the very first amniotes. The amnion is a protective envelope. Inside is the embryo, of course, but also the amniotic fluid. In other words, it's as if the liquid environment has invited itself into the egg. The embryo is protected in this precious liquid. It can develop without fear. The amnion protects the embryo liquid unit. External pressure and desiccation are no longer an obstacle to the birth of life on Earth. An egg can finally survive on dry land. Beings like Hylonomus laeli can now move away from wetlands and into the forest. Their bodies have also adapted to this new way of life. Look at the skin. It no longer looks as moist or even vicious as the previous amphibians we met. It's drier. It's also tighter, making it easier to fight dehydration. In other words, when Hylonomus approaches a watering hole, it's only to drink when it's thirsty, but not for breeding purposes. Hylonomus wasn't the only amniote to live in the Carboniferous. Petrolacosaurus is also widely present. It's an important encounter because, according to some scientists, it's one of the oldest Diapsids known. It may even have given rise to crocodiles, dinosaurs, and since birds are descended from it, even birds. In fact, Diapsids are a clade of amniote tetrapods from the sauropsid clade, which includes all present-day birds and reptiles. One of the great particularities of Diapsids is that their skulls have two pairs of temporal fossae, i.e. two openings. The squamosal and postorbital bones separate them. These openings allow the jaws to lock in a closed position, giving them greater strength when bitten. It fed on small forest insects. This little lizard-like animal ran faster than other species, especially on the ground. And lucky for him, despite being only 40 centimeters or 16 inches long, it was the prey of giants, such as Megarachne, and its 35 centimeter or 14-inch diameter, Meganeura and its 70 centimeter or 28-inch wingspan, or in a completely different genre, giant amphibians such as Proterogyrinus. Let's close our tour of the land of amniotes with a synapsid. This is Archaeopteryx, the oldest known synapsid, along with the Echinoderms. According to some paleobiologists, it is probably the distant ancestor of mammals. Archaeopteryx had strong jaws that could open wider than those of early reptiles. While its sharp teeth were all the same shape, it also had a pair of canines that were more enlarged than the other teeth. He lives here, at the edge of this Lepidodendron forest. Speaking of forests, I think it's time we learn more about this new plant cover, don't you? Judging by the landscape in which this Archaeopteryx is growing, it seems to have developed quite well. While we were roaming the ocean and taking our first steps on the coast, a lot was happening on the continent. At the dawn of the Carboniferous, the forest was in its infancy. Now it covers a large part of the continent. It is a new ecosystem in its own right, providing food and shelter for many species of animals of all shapes and sizes. Our Archaeopteryx, for example, has found everything it needs to survive here. Before we go a little deeper into the coal forest, let's take a look at it from the air. Look at how the vegetation cover grows a little more every millennium, and how beautiful it is now. A luxuriant, rich, and varied forest is born. It didn't all happen in a day, of course. Time played its most beautiful part, following the order of things to create perfect harmony. Initially, the vegetation took root near water sources and wetlands. At that point, plant reproduction still required very specific characteristics. Without a wetland, the conquest of plants would have been, at least at their current stage of evolution, totally impossible. We'll see why. Other plants before them, such as Cooksonia, had prepared the ground. They managed to get away with it, growing in a wide band along coastlines and waterways. Their tilling of the soil then encourages the birth of other plants, which in turn develop and spread a little further over these wetlands. It's as if a virtuous circle is taking shape before our very eyes. But terrestrial vegetation doesn't just happen. Each has its own place and its own characteristics. We can now speak of a forest for its richness and diversity. In the water, we can see plants such as calamites. At the water's edge, we can also see a sphenophyllum. A few meters from the shore, species such as chordates, seed ferns, and sigillaria complete the picture. Deeper down, arborescent species dominate the landscape. Despite the medium-sized ferns, Ceronius, and Lepidodendron can also be seen. Chordate and sigillaria are also visible further inland. This pattern may vary from region to region, but whatever the location, the forest observes a certain pre-established order in which each plant has its place. As mentioned above, the Earth's climate, and therefore biotope, is clearly demarcated by distance from the equator. The significant variation in temperature between the poles and the equator leads to a zonation of vegetation. Large coal-bearing forests of Lepidodendron, sigillaria, calamites, and chordates develop at the equator, while forests of trees such as Glossopteris, thrive in temperate zones. It's time to go deeper into the forest to understand the different challenges of this plant cover, but also to understand how plants have managed to adapt in order to grow, develop, and diversify. Let's start by looking at how they reproduce. This analysis will give us a better understanding of how vegetation has been able to conquer larger territories. Why did most plant species end up in wetlands? There's a very good reason. Their mode of reproduction required it. Initially, species develop in patches. This is explained by a mode of reproduction based on cell cloning. This development is typical of organisms whose capacity to exploit the environment is limited, as they do not yet have any real roots other than for light capture. In other words, cloning was the only way for them to reproduce quickly and efficiently, given the conditions available to them. But this mode of reproduction also has its limits. If it's useful on poor, hard soil, it's less so for conquering a larger territory. Then spores made their grand entrance. From then on, reproduction became easier, but certain elements had to be present for it to work. A mild climate is not enough. Humidity is necessary for germination. Spores are released by the plant, then germinate to form male or female plantlets, known as gametophytes. It is these gametophytes that produce the sex cells. To make a new plant, the gametophytes must come together so that their sex cells can meet, and in the vast majority of cases, water serves as the conduit for this rapprochement. Lepidodendrons, Sigillaria, calamites, and Pecopterus use this reproductive model to extend their territory. So, to go where the water isn't, we need to take another look at our mode of reproduction and be inventive. A mode in which the germination cell is protected. A mode where sex cells can meet without the intervention of water. This is precisely when the seed appears. The seed results from the fertilization of a female sex cell by a male sex cell. A fruit then hatches, housing the seeds. These contain all the plant's genetics. The pteridospermales take advantage of this new way of developing the species. They are seed ferns. This is also the case with the Cordiatalis. They had both male and female branches. The ovules, aided by the wind, could then receive the pollen grains and form a fruit in which the seeds nestled. These seeds can even lie dormant, waiting for the right moment to begin the germination process. A major advantage for reproduction in unfavorable climatic conditions. This is how new plants were able to conquer the Earth's soil, and how vast forests came into being. Some of these forests are known as coal forests. Even so, most of them were made up of spore-bearing plants, as the humid environment lent itself to this. These included Lepidodendrons, Sigillaria, calamites, and even tree ferns. But there were also some seed-bearing plants, like the Cordiatalis we've just seen, the first conifers, if you will, and seed-bearing ferns called pteridospermales. Now let's see why we speak of coal forests. How is coal formed? The production process is highly specific. The Carboniferous was the geological period when production was most intense. It was one of the events that marked this period and earned it its name. Since then, no production has been equaled in terms of intensity. For this coal to form, 3 elements are required. A dense forest, of course, but not just anywhere. It has to be close to the mountains and its feet in the water, in the heart of a marshy area. It's when all these elements come together, and only when they come together, that a particular phenomenon is triggered. When a lush, dense forest forms in a wetland between mountains, there comes a time when the ground sinks. The forest is drowned, so to speak. It gradually dies. Plant debris begins to accumulate slowly, but it doesn't decompose. Putrefaction is only possible if the fungi that cause it are present. According to scientists, this is not yet the case at this stage of life on Earth. You're probably wondering why I insisted on the presence of mountains. I'm getting to that. Sediment from the erosion of nearby mountains covers this plant debris. Depending on the region and the very makeup of the mountain range, the type of sediment may be different. In the case of clay, shale is formed. If it's sand, then sandstone will form later. The subsided and flooded area is then filled with these materials. A new cycle can begin. A new forest is formed. When it reaches its peak, the ground subsides. The forest is drowned and dies. Sediments cover the flooded area and the plant debris. They fossilize and charcoal forms. Then a new forest springs up, and so on. Each destroyed forest becomes a new coal seam. In some coal mining areas, there are hundreds of layers of fossilized forest. But this doesn't mean that the cycle is a quick one, taking just a handful of years. Coal is transformed very slowly. It takes millions of years to produce coal, and it takes on different forms, or rather, a different constitution, as it transforms before it can be called hard coal. We generally speak of coals and coal-bearing forests when referring to coal production. But this is misleading. Coal is a generic term, and hard coal is just one specific quality of coal. To better understand, let's look at the production of this phenomenon. The decomposition of plants in a low-oxygen, fungus-free environment during the Carboniferous period first takes the form of peat. Peat is the incomplete decomposition of plants in a water-saturated zone. In other words, it is a fossil organic material. It contains relatively little carbon, around 60%. After a few million years, peat becomes lignite. This is the first stage of fossil plant coal. It is brown and compact. It's the first stage of coal, but also the least qualitative, at least in terms of combustible energy. As coal transforms, its carbon content increases. Next comes hard coal, a fossilized vegetable coal with an even higher carbon content than lignite. It is also black in color, but brighter. After hard coal comes anthracite. This time the carbon content approaches 94%. It is so concentrated that it is difficult to ignite. The final stage is graphite. This is pure crystallized carbon. It is no longer flammable. So man is looking for the best quality coal with a sufficiently high carbon content, but still easily flammable, to make a perfect fuel. Hard coal is the preferred fuel, and it's this interest in man that has made him the talk of the town. But before man came along and sought to harness this combustible energy, the Carboniferous coal-making process had an impact on the climate. The burial of so much organic carbon caused a dizzying drop in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This drop in CO2 not only cools the climate, but also increases oxygen levels. Oxygen levels will have an impact on the development of insects, but we'll come back to that later. The erosion of high mountains increases. They are subject to heavy rainfall due to their geographical position, and they too draw in carbon dioxide. The combination of these phenomena, leading to a sharp drop in carbon dioxide, is conducive to the formation of an ice cap. Remember, we touched on this subject when we talked about the changing climate during the Carboniferous period. This ice cap formed mainly in southern Gondwana, around 330 million years ago. This was the start of the Gondwanic glaciation, which continued through the Permian. You'll understand better now why we talk about coal forests, but also why they played a role in the cooling of certain areas of the planet. Now it's time to understand another tree-related phenomenon. We mentioned seeds earlier, but that's not the only revolution in trees. Let's see how deciduous leaves came about. The opulence of the vegetation colonizing the continent has the main effect of considerably lowering CO2 levels in the air, and by the same token, the planet's overall temperature. We've seen this regularly on our various time travels. An ecosystem is based on a delicate balance between a biotope, fauna, flora, climate, and environment. All these elements are interconnected, and each is ultimately dependent on the others. A change in temperature inevitably has an impact on all these elements, flora and fauna included. Such a major change can make some species more vulnerable, but it can also have a number of positive consequences. In temperate zones, for example, temperature differences will favor the development of deciduous trees. Trees need to adopt new aptitudes to continue colonizing the soil. They need to make better use of the sun's energy, save energy to survive temperature variations, and develop a more durable means of reproduction. Deciduous leaves thus make their grand entrance among arborescent plants, while the great coal forests stretch all the way to the equator. Leaves are not only less necessary for trees, they can also endanger them. Large quantities of water evaporate through the leaves every day. In temperate zones, certain climatic changes could lead to the loss of the tree. The trunk and branches are insulated by the bark, and the roots buried in the ground are sufficiently armed against this drop in temperature. But the leaves? They're on the front line and very greedy for water. To resist, the tree learns to get rid of the superfluous. Not only deciduous leaves, but also different modes of reproduction allow trees to grow widely across the continent. The newly formed forests were home to a wide variety of fauna. The first amniotes, or reptiles, animals such as Echinoderms, Archaeopteryx, or Hylonomus lyelli, live in the forest, but they share it with insects. Contrary to popular belief, these animals are not always the predators. In fact, they sometimes side with the giant insect's prey. As the forest grows and becomes so luxuriant and varied, insects benefit greatly from this new ecosystem. One of the great characteristics of the Carboniferous period was its giant insects. It's true that for our current way of thinking, to imagine for a single second that a millipede or dragonfly is close to a meter long seems totally implausible and even downright frightening. We're used to dealing with insects that are much smaller, sometimes even tiny or microscopic. Yet the Carboniferous is renowned for being the reign of giant insects. However, here again it's important to keep things in perspective if we want to get as close to reality as possible. While it's true that some Carboniferous insects were monstrously large, not all of them were. It's not a generality, an absolute rule among insects of this period. Many of them were just as small as we might imagine today. With that out of the way, let's dig a little deeper to understand the reasons for the unusual proportions of this particular animal group. Many scientists have tried to understand the causes of gigantism in these species. Why did they adopt such proportions? Several hypotheses have been put forward on the subject, but most of them are based on the significant increase in oxygen levels in the atmosphere. We have seen that the fall of the coal forests and the formation of coal led to a drop in carbon dioxide, but also to a sharp rise in oxygen levels. Michael S. Engel, a paleoentomologist specializing in insects at the University of Kansas, explains that insects don't have lungs, but rather small external orifices. These orifices, called stigmas, allow air to enter their bodies. It circulates through a network of tubes, the tracheae, to supply the organs with oxygen. This form of passive respiration is not very efficient, as oxygen diffusion is slower than if it were carried by the blood, as in vertebrates. The only way for giant arthropods to have enough oxygen to survive with such a respiratory system is for the air reaching their tracheae to be more oxygenated. This was the case in the Carboniferous, when the rate was 35% instead of 21% today. Insects trapped in amber are one of the means by which scientists have been able to determine this oxygen content. A number of experiments have been carried out to test this line of thought. Researchers led by Arizona State University paleobiologist John Vandenbrooks have grown very large dragonflies, rearing the insects from start to finish in environments similar to Earth's oxygen conditions millions of years ago. They turned out to be 15% larger than normal. To correlate these results, they also collected 11 other living fossils, such as beetles and cockroaches, in 3 habitats with different oxygen concentrations. Some had 31%, as in the Carboniferous, others 21%, as today, and still others 12%, as 240 million years ago. They discovered that dragonflies and beetles grew faster and larger in an oxygen-rich environment, while cockroaches grew more slowly and remained the same size. They also observed that all but 2 species of bugs became smaller than normal at lower oxygen concentrations. This probably explains why not all the insects were oversized at the time. With their respiratory systems, they adapt to the amount of oxygen they can take in. Coming back to insects in general, whether gigantic or ordinary sized, it's hard to say today how many different species populated the Earth. Indeed, we have no precise idea of the current number. To date, around 1 million different species have been described, but it is estimated that there are probably 10 to 100 times that number, many of them found in the canopies of the great tropical forests, notably the Amazon rainforest. So there's still a lot we don't know, even today. In the Carboniferous, we know of certain species, but there is certainly a great deal that is unknown even then. Let's take a look at some of these giants. To inaugurate our encounter with Carboniferous insects, let's start with one of the most emblematic of the era, Meganeura moniae. This is the most famous giant dragonfly of the period. With a wingspan of over 70 centimeters or 28 inches, it weighed 150 grams. In other words, such an insect on your forearm would have the same wingspan as a hawk. Its abdomen, as you can see, is very elongated. It also has 4 large ribbed wings attached to its thorax. Its 6 jointed legs are covered with spines, no doubt to help it hang on to its victims. Dragonflies are predators, and this one is a fearsomely efficient one. Its eyesight is a major asset. It has a 360-degree view. Nothing escapes it. But it's not enough to have a good view of your victim. You also need to be reactive and powerful in order to seize it and give it no chance of regaining its freedom. Reactivity is provided by its wings and legs. Unlike our modern dragonflies, which do this while hovering, this one was able to attack in flight. Scientists have studied the fossil and hypothesized that it could reach a top speed of 70 kilometers per hour or 44 miles per hour. The power, however, lies in the head. Its mouth parts are designed for biting. She was never a picky eater, making do with whatever came her way. Cockroaches, bedbugs, cicadas, beetles, mosquitoes, wasps, termites, ants. Its diet was as varied as insect biodiversity could be in these lush Carboniferous forests. Here's a 20-centimeter or 8-inch cockroach that should make a perfect breakfast for our majestic Meganeura. In the same vein, but smaller, with a wingspan of 55 centimeters or 22 inches, we can also mention the Mazotheros, Haliodictyopteran. This one has 3 pairs of wings. Another animal, this time wingless, is as iconic of the period as Meganeura. It's a centipede, Arthropods. 450 million years ago, centipedes, i.e. myriapods, a sub-branch of the arthropods and cousin of insects, began to emerge from the water. They were probably the first animals to settle permanently on continents, but they were probably not at first as impressive as the one that now awaits us. Over 2.5 meters, or 8 feet long, and around 50 centimeters, or 20 inches wide. And that's just the beginning. This centipede was as long as an alligator. Arthropods' diet still poses questions for the scientific community. Traces of pollen were found in its abdomen, suggesting a herbivorous diet. But it also had 2 pincers and a very powerful jaw. Such tools suggest a carnivorous diet. Let's take a look at Megarachne, a spider. At least aesthetically it looks like one, even if recent studies have shown that scientists classify the animal as a eurypterid. This misclassification was based on certain characteristics, such as the shape of its carapace, the arrangement of its mouth parts, its circular belly, and its 15-millimeter circular eyes, located between the other 2 eyes in the middle of its head. At first glance, this suggested that Megarachne was a spider, and not just any spider, the largest ever to have lived on Earth. Since then, the tools and techniques used to study fossils, as well as our knowledge of the past, have enabled us to analyze these animals from a different, more precise angle. Although this is certainly a eurypterid, its deceptive appearance has earned it the right to appear here, simply for the pleasure and fright that such an animal provides. With a length of 35 centimeters or 14 inches and a distance of 60 centimeters or 24 inches between the upper legs, it is without doubt the most impressive of all arachnids. With such proportions, it could cover a cat. In addition to its size, its predatory prowess is nothing to be ashamed of. She's perfectly equipped for the hunt, and will stop at nothing when the opportunity presents itself. The only relief is that Megarachne is no longer with us. Crossing paths with this type of animal is enough to make your hair stand on end, and make you scream in horror. Let's end our tour of Carboniferous arthropods and insects on a softer note, with the discovery in 2021 of Tenoptilus frequens. The Paris Natural History Museum has funded and coordinated a paleology research group. It was this study that brought Tenoptilus frequens to light. It has an abdominal appendage for depositing eggs. These animals are known as ovipositors. They also have 3 pairs of sword-shaped valves and 2 valve articulation systems. In other words, they have all the characteristics of Orthoptera. Analyses have enabled us to study the fossilized animal's abdomen in greater depth. We're talking here about a lobated insect, i.e. of the locust, grasshopper, or cricket genus. These animals were already living on Earth in the Carboniferous period. The major difference between today's insect population and that of the past lies in the insect's growth phase. Back then, very few were part of the so-called metamorphosis insects, such as flies, bees, and beetles. Vegetation is one of the keys to this animal diversification. Alongside the classic ferns with sporangia-bearing leaves, there are ferns whose leaves bear seeds for the very first time. After the appearance of amniotic eggs, the seed enters the scene. So it seems that plants, too, are undergoing major revolutions. Numerous species, insects, but also synapsids, diapsids, and amphibians are taking advantage of this new, flourishing ecosystem and all the riches it has to offer. The expansion of all these species should not, however, obscure the change that is taking place in the forest at the end of the Carboniferous period. Indeed, with the end of coal formation comes the end of the Carboniferous, from which the period takes its name. One possible explanation for the end of charcoal production lies in the appearance of a new species of lignivorous or xylophagous fungi, capable of degrading all lignin thanks to enzymes known as lignin peroxidases. The Jurassic began around 200 million years ago and ended 145 million years ago. The period therefore spans around 55 million years. The Jurassic takes its name from the Jura, a region of France where scientists have found limestone and numerous fossils dating from this period. Like the Triassic, the Jurassic is subdivided into 3 major periods, each characterized by specific events. The first is the Lower Jurassic. This first stage is a kind of introduction to the Jurassic. It began around 200 million years ago and ended around 175 million years ago. The remains of the Triassic are still very much in evidence, but significant changes are beginning to take place. This Jurassic sub-period lays the foundations, so to speak, for a new period under construction. During the Lower Jurassic, we can see the huge Pangea continental rift forming between the northern and southern hemispheres. We can also see that the Tethys Ocean, located on the right in the Pangea Trough, inevitably rushes into this fault and helps to free the 2 future continents, Gondwana to the south and Laurasia to the north. But in addition to these geographical and geological changes, the world of living things is also taking a new turn. New species are emerging. Let's move on to the Middle Jurassic, which spans the period from 175 million years ago to 161 million years ago. Here is a map of the world 170 million years ago. We can see a new divide emerging in the northern hemisphere. North America on one side, Eurasia on the other. To the south, future continents such as South America, Africa, India, Australia, and even Antarctica are still strongly linked, even if the beginnings of a few fractures are starting to break apart. For flora and fauna, this is a period of demographic explosion. The living world is becoming increasingly rich and diverse. At the end of the period, around 150 million years ago, in the middle of the Upper Jurassic, from 161 million years ago to 145 million years ago, we can really see that the fractures to the south of the hemisphere are becoming more pronounced. The part of Gondwana that forms India, Australia, and Antarctica is moving further and further away from the part that still unites South America and Africa. To the north, we can also see new changes, notably on the continent that will soon form Europe. For the moment, it's just a huge archipelago in the heart of the Tethys Ocean. As you can see, geography underwent many changes during the Jurassic period. The face of the Earth as we know it today is slowly taking shape. A second continental waltz is underway. This time, it was not the formation of a single continent, but rather the formation of several perfectly distinct continents. Such geological changes have major consequences for climate. In the first part of the Triassic period, temperatures rose sharply. However, from the second period onwards, temperatures softened markedly. This decline continued during the Jurassic, but temperatures rose again somewhat during this period, mainly due to the terrestrial activities mentioned above. There are no polar caps yet to cool the Earth a little and slow down the sun's rays. Nevertheless, the climate is quite favorable to vegetation, and by extension, to the land animals that benefit from this plant cover. The Jurassic was hot and humid, unlike anything we experience on Earth today. This climate favors the expansion of flora. The plant cover is lush and well-developed, allowing wildlife to fill numerous ecological niches. Look how incredible the Jurassic forest is. The landscape before us is simply magnificent. After such a crisis, such dense, lush plant cover is reassuring. A few million years ago, the scene was very different. All was desolation, utter chaos. This time, life seems to inhabit this forest. Let's begin our journey in the heart of this undergrowth. Afterwards, we're sure to meet some of the forest's inhabitants and discover some emblematic Jurassic species. In what landscape did our famous Jurassic dinosaurs evolve? To understand the future diversification of dinosaur species, it's important to know not only the context, but also the world in which they evolved. As we've seen, the latter benefited from a lush vegetation cover. But what does it really look like? From small bushes to large trees, vegetation offers multiple ecological niches for insects and other vertebrates. Vegetation supports herbivores, but also small carnivores that feed on insects, for example. Other predators take advantage of the abundance of small carnivorous and insectivorous prey to feed in their turn. The large carnivores themselves feed on them, and the circle is complete. In other words, a complete food chain is created thanks to all the plants you can see in front of you. In the forest, you'll find a bit of everything, from herbivores to carnivores, insectivores, and even omnivores. This dietary diversity is made possible by the wide variety of vegetation and environments found in the Jurassic. You have to go deep into the forest to understand this. Once in the undergrowth, you can see not only the richness of the plant cover, but also the different strata of the forest, from the lowest and fullest to the highest and sparsest. You can also see how varied the genera and species are. To get to the heart of Jurassic vegetation, let's start with ferns. Yes, they're still with us today, as they may have been in the past, and they're even benefiting from new evolutionary radiations. They make up a large part of the plant cover of the period. Within this large group, there are many families, genera, and species. All families, sometimes quite different from one another, find their place within a particular ecological niche. These differences in ferns also lead to diversification in the insects and small animals that depend on them. Among Jurassic ferns, we can cite several families, such as Glycania, truncata, Osmundastrum, Dipterodaceae, while other, taller ferns, such as Dixonaceae and Cyatheaceae, are also well represented. The great diversity of these ferns plays a decisive role in Jurassic forests, as we have just said, as they form the basis of certain ecological niches. But their position in the forest also explains why they so perfectly embody this role in the ecosystem. Ferns are part of what we call the lower strata of the forest. To put it another way, they form a sort of green meadow in the undergrowth. It's a green paradise for insects, but also for small animals, which find shelter and food in abundance. Although small, not always, ferns are also home to the giant sauropod family. But we'll come back to that a little later, once we've completed our overview of Jurassic plants. During this period, ferns were abundant, but there were also many other plants. After the ferns and small bushes that form the undergrowth, there's a middle stratum and a higher stratum that make up the forest proper. This Jurassic forest is luxuriant and abundant all over the globe. Today, it's hard to imagine that vegetation could be so abundant all over the Earth, as different continents and geological zones embody different types of climate and therefore vegetation. But in the Jurassic, even on the fringes of present-day Greenland, known for its ice and biting cold, vegetation was rich and well-developed, unlike today, when it is rather low and sparse. Three main groups of arborescent plants can be identified in the Jurassic. The first group comprises conifers, also known as pinophytes. This group includes the Cheirolipidaceae, a family that is now extinct. The Aracaraceae and Podocarapaceae, on the other hand, are still around today. Pinophytes are large trees. They are easily distinguished from others by their cone-shaped fruit. These cones serve as the plant's reproductive organs. On this tree, some cones are male, others female. These trees are called gymnosperms. Reproduction requires a little help from Mother Nature, particularly from the wind, but also from a few insects of the Mecopteran family, which have been active since the Middle Jurassic. They also provide an ecological niche for small insectivorous animals that settle in the forest. Everything is linked in nature. The great advantage of these pinophytes is their ability to establish themselves in a wide variety of environments, even the harshest. In this way, they have managed to colonize a large part of the world's landmass, even intertropical regions or salty environments, near coasts and maritime zones, for example. But this will not be enough to compete with angiosperms, the flowering plants that will soon occupy a large part of their territory. In addition to pinophytes, the forest is also populated by ginkgophytes. These species of ginkgos are the dominant trees in the canopy. They can reach up to 40 meters or 130 feet in height. Ginkgo digitata and adiantoids can be seen in this forest. Digitata trees have fan-shaped indented leaves. These species thrive in tropical and semi-tropical climates. The absence of cones and their famous palmate leaves distinguish them from previous conifers. These species will also provide new opportunities for the young fauna that gradually settled on planet Earth during the Jurassic period. Let's return to the lower forest stratum. In this region, it is also colonized by another type of plant, the cycads. The most dominant and emblematic group of the period is undoubtedly the so-called cycadophytes. Cycads are far from reaching the heights of the previous group. Their foliage covers the lower forest floor, rather like ferns. They are found mainly in tropical zones with their characteristic hot, humid climate. This tropical zone is a highly favorable environment not only for these plants, but also for the many insects and small animals that depend on them. Some of these species, such as Pseudoctenus and Nilsionia, look a little like palm trees, with a crown of large leaves that fall and form the trunk. Horsetails are also very common, especially in these same wetlands. These plants can serve as food for a number of herbivores, thus promoting the development of a balanced food chain and a stable ecosystem. It's true that while these lower strata benefit insectivores and small carnivores, we can see here that herbivores also find plenty to eat. Among the horsetails, there are two major species, very popular at the time: the neocalamites and the equisetails. In addition to their great diversity of plants, these forests are home to a wide variety of environments. There are jungles such as one might imagine in the Amazon, swamps and low-lying plants, large clearings where the sun floods the ground with its heat, and coastal landscapes. All these environments form diverse ecological niches, and thus benefit a wide variety of species. It's time to go and meet them. Let's stay on the edge of the forest near this swamp and begin our discovery of Jurassic fauna with a group we've been following for some time now, the amphibians. You were expecting to talk about dinosaurs, weren't you? When you think of Jurassic fauna, you immediately think of dinosaurs. They're the emblematic group of the Jurassic and probably the most important of the animal kingdom during this period. But we sometimes forget that many other species contributed to weaving a veritable ecosystem in which these dinosaurs were able to flourish. Each of these species is part of a greater whole, and each has a role to play in the survival of the others. Dinosaurs were far from the only species to occupy the Earth at this time, and the different groups we're now going to look at undoubtedly contributed to their rise. Let's get back to our famous amphibians. During the Carboniferous and Permian periods in particular, amphibians were the main terrestrial predators, so to speak. Their size was sometimes much greater than we would have expected from the amphibians we know today. By the Jurassic period, they had largely lost this prominent position. Despite their great size, the amphibian population declined considerably, to the benefit of new species. After the Triassic crisis, the arrival of the first dinosaurs and the great diversification of lizards, these animals saw their ecological niche shrink dramatically, all of which logically led to a population decline. When there's no more food and a loss of territory, the species slowly dies. Despite this, a few managed to survive the Triassic period. These even managed to settle comfortably into the Jurassic. So all is not lost for our amphibians. During the Middle and Upper Jurassic, we discover a group that continues to grow to the present day through three major families. These are the Lissamphibians. They form the only surviving group of the amphibian class. This pretty Viorella near this watering hole is a great opportunity to get to grips with the new families of Lissamphibians. It's probably one of the oldest frogs and a member of the Anarin family. Feeding on insects, this little Viorella measures just a few centimeters long. However small, it already displays the physical characteristics of frogs as we know them today, including the shape of its head, large eyes, and muscular legs. Without knowing its group or lineage, it's easy to imagine that it's a primitive frog just by observing its behavior and silhouette. The Lissamphibians include the Anarin family and frogs like the one we've just seen. Lissamphibians also include the Urodal family, i.e. salamanders, and the Gymnophian family, vermiform amphibians also known as apodes or Cecilia. It is these last two families that will interest us now. Still in the Jurassic marshes, an insectivore quite different from Viorella roams the same environment. This time it's one of the very first salamanders, according to the latest paleontological research. Carorus sharovi has all the trappings of a salamander. Its triangular head, upward pointing eyes, and distinctive legs are all distinctive. It measures around 20 centimeters or 8 inches. Its head seems flatter than today's salamanders, and the triangular shape is also more pronounced. Studies of Carrarus fossils suggest that this small primitive salamander fed on snails, worms, crustaceans, and perhaps even insects. It thrives in freshwater, where it finds everything it needs to survive. In the early Jurassic, a worm-like amphibian also appeared. We rarely think of this type of morphology when we think of amphibians, but worm-like caecilians are indeed part of this large family. They like damp, dense, warm forests. And in marshes, particularly those of North America, this Eocaecilia finds plenty to do. It measures around 15 centimeters or 6 inches long. It is therefore quite discreet. Unlike the modern caecilians we meet on the continent, this one hasn't lost its legs. If you're observant, you'll see that it has 2 small legs at the front, shortly after the head, and 2 more at the back, close to the tail. Modern caecilians have poor eyesight and often live underground. It is therefore possible that our Eocaecilia micropodia, with its legs and eyes a little more developed than modern specimens, enjoys the great outdoors more than its descendants. Like the other amphibians we met, it feeds on insects of all kinds. It has to be said that over the course of time, they too have diversified considerably. The Diptera group, which includes flies and mosquitoes, has seen an explosion of new species. In this swamp, a Tarsophlebbia dragonfly can be seen here. A little further on one of the very common seed plants from the Triassic to the Cretaceous, the Bennettitails Weilandiella, we can also see a new type of dipteran, no doubt a close relative of the cousins. Another small insect, about 6 millimeters long, called Gallimosovelia grioti, can also be seen on the lake. According to the paleontologists who have worked on the subject, this is a water spider and probably the oldest fossil of an aquatic insect of the order Geromorpha ever discovered. This region is ideal for observing insects, so let's stop here for a few moments to take a closer look at a few of them. As we just mentioned, mosquitoes and flies have also undergone a major radiation and population explosion. Climate and the expansion of vegetation have greatly favored the rise of this type of insect. But that's not the only reason. The first insects appeared as early as the Paleozoic era and were mainly terrestrial at first. But the acquisition of wings, and therefore the ability to fly, greatly expanded their range of niches, and by extension, their territory. We find Hymenoptera, including bees, wasps, and ants. Lepidoptera, with 2 pairs of membranous wings, such as butterflies. Diptera, with 2 pairs of wings, such as flies, mosquitoes, and horseflies. And Neuroptera, including lacewings and anteaters. One of the most represented groups of Diptera in the Jurassic is undoubtedly the Stratileidae. This group comprises 2 genera, Stratilia and Vocilla. These flies have wings, contrary to what scientists first thought when studying fossils, particularly those preserved in amber. What led them astray were the fossil remains, without wings. The explanation actually lies in their deciduous wings. Like many modern insects such as ants, these flies probably lost their wings after mating. Sexual dimorphism is also noticeable in these species. Males have enlarged hind legs. This can be explained by mating requirements, since during their lovemaking the male has to position himself above the female and hold on with his hind legs. Lacewings are neuropterans, characterized by two pairs of equal-sized membranous wings with numerous clearly visible veins. Jurassic lacewings have much to teach us. Fossils, for example, have revealed that these insects were already using camouflage as a means of survival, particularly in the larval stage. They blend into the background, make themselves forgotten, and can thus hope to slip through the net of nearby predators. Polystoicotes punctata, commonly known as the giant chrysopod, first appeared in the Jurassic period and was still around until the 1950s to 1960s. Incredible as it may seem, the giant lacewing seems to be back in the news. A specimen was found in Arkansas, USA, in 2012, but it wasn't until 2020 that entomologist Professor Michael Sfarla made the connection with Polystoicotes punctata. Insects don't just thrive in the forest. In the aquatic environment, many species are also abundant. Another giant insect. Yes, the Jurassic period also saw insects of rather exceptional size. But fortunately for us, Morrisonepa, unlike the giant lacewing, has now disappeared. Morrisonepa is one of the giant water bugs, like the genus Lithoceros, and the latter are not renowned for their beauty or gentleness. These insects are extremely painful to bite, injecting their prey with a saliva packed with enzymes that break down proteins. No chance of escaping. Using its proboscis, the giant bug simply sucks up the delicious cocktail of the prepared mixture, a semi-digested bodily liquid from the prey. If Lithoceros can prey on snails, crustaceans, fish, amphibians, or even snakes, it may be that our Morrisonepa has the same culinary tastes. Other forms of insects are also making their appearance. As we'll soon see, dinosaurs, particularly feathered ones, but also furry mammals, also emerged in the Jurassic. These feathers and hairs offer new opportunities for insects, which can easily attach themselves to their new hosts. Fleas, for example, which are hematophagous insects that feed on blood, made their grand entrance into the animal kingdom to the great displeasure of their hosts. Finally, it was in the Jurassic period that the very first snakes appeared. One of the world's oldest snakes, Diablophis, can be seen here. Diablophis, as well as Portugalophis and Parvoraptor, are primitive snakes. Of course, they have much in common with our present-day snakes, notably the particular shape of their skulls, but they also have a few differences. According to fossil studies, even if the remains are few and often incomplete, paleontologists have reason to believe that these snakes still had their legs. If we summarize the Jurassic context seen in this first part of the video, we can see that plants, insects, amphibians, snakes, and other small animals of the forest and lower vegetation provided a rich ecosystem and varied ecological niches. Each in its own way helped the expansion of the dinosaurs. It's impossible to talk about Jurassic fauna without mentioning dinosaurs, of course, so here we are at last, right in the heart of the Jurassic, facing those famous dinosaurs. They are the emblematic animals of the period. They were very diverse in the Jurassic period, but also very numerous. Remember, dinosaurs first appeared in the Triassic, but their presence was still rather timid. And then, after the crisis, some of them didn't survive. However, the Jurassic did not mark the end of this great group. Quite the contrary. Dinosaurs took over the period and reigned supreme in the four corners of the world. But not everything happened in a day. For them, it all began with the archosaurs, their common ancestor, an animal clade that includes crocodilians, birds, pterosaurs, and of course all dinosaurs. What all these seemingly different species have in common is a particular feature of their anatomy, the gizzard. This muscular part is used to crush hard food. Over the millennia, archosaurs formed various lineages, including the one we're particularly interested in now, the dinosaurs. Their emergence was still rather fragile at the beginning of the Triassic period, especially as the first specimens were already facing major difficulties that were to slow down their evolution initially, the biological crisis that marked the end of the first Mesozoic period. First of all, it took time for nature to recover from the obstacles placed in its path. The Jurassic therefore represents an initial period of calm. The lower Jurassic in particular is a transitional period when nature and the living world gradually reassert their rights. Some species die out, others survive, and that's about it. No major radiation, no demographic explosion of any species. But once the lower Jurassic is over, the middle Jurassic is marked by a great explosion of diversification and the development of numerous species. This demographic and radiative explosion continues into the upper Jurassic. And the vast majority of these species belong to the vast dinosaur family. From the Middle Jurassic onwards, the era of the dinosaurs was truly established. Adaptations, radiations, evolutions, diversifications, demographic explosions, everything came together for dinosaurs to become major players in the Jurassic period, and more broadly, in a large part of the Mesozoic. While two major groups of dinosaurs had already appeared in the Triassic, the diversity of ornithischians and saurischians exploded in the Jurassic. Among the ornithischians, mainly herbivores that moved in herds, three major groups appeared that were to expand the dinosaur family: the theriophores, the ornithopods, and the marginocephali. The suborder theriophores means shield-bearer in ancient Greek. This gives you a clue as to what makes this group so special. Although they are mostly quadrupedal herbivores, their distinctive feature is their backs, which are armored with bony plates, spikes, or spurs, depending on the species. As we saw when discussing vegetation earlier, there were several strata in the plant cover. Low-growing plants were one of the favorite foods of the dinosaur that now awaits us. It's a very popular dinosaur, recognizable by its famous bony plates alternating in two rows on its back. This is the famous Stegosaurus. His body is quite stocky, but his head is rather small compared to the rest of his body. Scientists are still debating the usefulness of Stegosaurus's bony plates. But several interesting hypotheses have been put forward. One of these is that they may have been used as a deterrent, or even a defensive device against predators. Stegosaurus, especially juveniles, were preyed upon by dinosaurs such as Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus. Recent research also suggests that these plates were gorged with blood and therefore sported a bright red hue that could also greatly intimidate any bold predator. But it's also possible that these famous spikes are simply a courtship tool, or that they have a thermoregulatory function. If they are also vascularized, they can act a bit like a solar panel, capturing heat and transmitting it into the bloodstream to warm the animal's body. But in other circumstances, such as when the animal shakes its plates, it can actually cool its body. In other words, he's got both air conditioning and heating at his fingertips. To get around, he had a good footing on his 4 legs. It has 3 little toes on its front legs and 5 on its hind legs. There are pads under each of them. On the other hand, his posture is a little unusual. If you look at its silhouette, you'll see that its front legs are shorter than its hind legs. The tail is well above the ground, while the head is relatively low. This morphology can be explained by the type of food it consumes, since it feeds on plants low to the ground. It has a beak and small teeth that enable it to cut and chew plants. Another type of dinosaur had bone plates, but they are quite distinct from those of the Stegosaurus. Here's a Nodosaurus, a Borealopelta to be more precise. As you can see, it has a bony plate that forms a sort of band, a bone nodule, hence its name, nodule lizard. The fossils of this Nodosaurus have enabled scientists to study, among other things, the remains of its stomach. We therefore know that it was a great gourmand, particularly fond of the ferns that carpet the forest floor. It must have consumed large quantities to meet its colossal energy requirements. The animal weighed over a ton and was almost 5 meters long. To facilitate digestion of these fatty ferns, the animal also swallowed the occasional stone. As its jaw wasn't much help when it came to chewing, it had to use gastroliths to make the most of the plants it ingested. Let's take a look at one of these cousins, a dinosaur best known for its distinctive tail. You may recognize it from the Ankylosaurus. It's more massive. Some 8 meters long, 2 meters or 7 feet high, and almost 4 tons rest on those 4 impressive legs. Unlike other members of the Theriophora family, he doesn't just have a body covered in thick armor. It also has a large club at the end of its tail. The last caudal vertebrae fused together to form the club. He also has tendons that enable him to direct and manipulate this club, in particular, to give it a certain impulse to parry or deliver blows. This asset enables him to defend himself against the predators that are rampant in the region where he lives, the riverside forests. But when attacked, he also tended to flatten himself on the ground and wait for the right moment to use his club. Do you have any idea why he adopts this peculiar behavior? If you look closely at his breastplate, you'll see that it covers a good part of his body from head to tail, but not his belly. This is his Achilles heel, his weak point. It's his Achilles heel, his weak spot, and he needs to protect it first if he's to survive in battle. Another peculiarity of this dinosaur is that it also swallowed stones to facilitate digestion of the plants it ingested. This is very common in dinosaurs that don't chew well or have sufficiently developed teeth to do so. Let's take a look at another type of dinosaur, the Ornithopoda. They may not be the most familiar to the general public, but they are one of the most successful and longest-lived dinosaur lineages. Just look at the great diversity of subgroups that define this branch. Fabrosauridae, Heterodontosauridae, Hypsilophodontidae, Iguanodontidae, Hadrosauridae, and each of these subgroups has a large number of species. This time, the ornithopods, unlike the theriophores, are herbivores for the most part, but walk more easily on 2 rather than 4 legs. Fabrosaurs are the oldest ornithopoda, but also the most primitive. They were very small compared to other groups, between 60 and 120 centimeters, or 24 inches and 47 inches. Heterodontosaurs were already a little more developed. We see the horny beak appear, but also more complex teeth. Heterodontosaurus, for example, sported 3 types of teeth: sharp teeth that formed a real jaw with fangs, and wide teeth for crushing plants. A new specimen of this group was discovered in 2012, even though it was discovered much earlier. Pegomastax africanus is an astonishing little animal, measuring 45 centimeters or 18 inches long. While its skull is reminiscent of a parrot, its body is more like that of a porcupine and its teeth more like those of a small feline carnivore. Despite its sharp fangs and canines, it's definitely a herbivore, and perhaps even frugivorous, to be quite precise. According to descriptions by Paul Sereno, an American paleontologist from the University of Chicago, the fangs helped it to pick up plants, particularly fruit, and the small teeth in front of the canines were used to cut up the plants. It's also possible that these teeth were used to defend against predators or to protect their territory, for example. The Hypsilophodontidae group is best illustrated by Hypsilophodon. They can be found in every corner of the globe. They are larger than the previous ornithopods we have encountered. Hypsilophodon can reach 2 meters or 7 feet in length and weigh around 25 kilograms or 55 pounds. Its beak, quite similar to that of a turtle, enables it to cut the vegetation on which it feeds. As for its gait, its skeleton seems to indicate that it is undoubtedly a good runner. But the latter is of particular importance here, not because of its running prowess, but because it may have given rise to the next 2 lineages, the Hadrosaur and the Iguanodont. This time, the latter evolved mainly on 4 legs. However, it's not impossible that they were able to run on their 2 hind legs to escape, for example. Iguanodon was the second dinosaur to be discovered in history. The name given to this group is linked to their teeth, which are quite similar to those of the iguanas we know today. They are savanna dwellers. It feeds on ferns, but also on arborescent plants such as conifers, cycads, or ginkgos, for example. He was able to get to grips with them, as he was able to chew for a long time. We mentioned this earlier in connection with vegetation, and it's important to make it clear here. As you can see from the presentation of these first dinosaur species, all the plants we have seen above provide an ecological niche for dinosaurs that are very different from one another. Ankylosaurs like low-growing plants like ferns, while others like Iguanodon are better equipped and taller, and can take advantage of arborescent plants like conifers or ginkgos. Let's close this little plant parenthesis and pick up where we left off with the study of dinosaurs, and iguanodonts in particular. With research and discoveries evolving day by day, each time revealing a new facet of our distant history, the genus Iguanodon is in the process of being redefined, if we can put it that way. Certain species of Iguanodon, for example, are sometimes given different names, such as beryllium, dolodon, Hypsilospinus, Pterillion, or Wadhurstia. Nevertheless, let's try to establish some general characteristics of the genus by studying Iguanodon bernissartensis. At 5 meters or 16 feet high and 9 meters or 30 feet long, it weighs almost 5 tons. This makes it one of the larger dinosaurs. This herbivore nevertheless had plenty of predators. To defend itself, it's possible that its thumb was a great help. At the very least, it enabled him to curb the ardor of his adversaries. In fact, his very sharp thumb turns into a dagger against carnivores when our Iguanodon feels threatened. Another specificity of the genus is its famous duck-like beak and prehensile tongue, which enable it to tear up vegetation. The subject of its limbs and gait has long been a matter of debate among scientists. Is it a quadruped, a biped, bipedal only in its prime, or when juvenile? Although a few discoveries, notably in 2000, have cleared up a few mysteries, the vagueness is still quite relative. Its long, heavy tail is the main reason for questioning its approach in the first instance. To understand ancient species, we rely on our knowledge in comparison with current species. Here, scientists see some semblance of a kangaroo. Its strong, muscular tail could provide support for the animal, which would then walk on its 2 hind legs. But in the 2000s, paleontologists brought to light an essential new feature of the Iguanodon skeleton. Its caudal vertebrae are connected and rigidified. The first thesis no longer holds. It would seem that the tail is more a kind of balance beam, or even, depending on the situation, a counterweight. Although it moved mainly on its 4 legs, it's not impossible that it also moved from time to time on its 2 hind legs, perhaps to run and escape. The strength of herbivores to defend themselves lies above all in the horde. In a group, you're stronger. They protect each other. Iguanodons were no exception to the rule. They may also have formed part of an interspecies horde, alongside ankylosaurs, for example, to increase their chances of curbing the ardor of nearby predators. Especially as these dinosaurs did not feed on the same plants, they had everything to gain and nothing to lose by joining forces to preserve their safety. Let's take a look at the last group of ornithopods, the hadrosaurs. According to certain paleontological studies, hadrosaurs are descended from iguanodonts. It's true that they share many common characteristics. For example, they share the duck beak. Hadrosaurs have a flattened skull, enlarged in the shape of a beak to enable them to reach and gather leaves from trees in tropical forests. This ability and their dentition are assets. They will thus be favored in future evolutionary radiations over other herbivores that need gastroliths, for example, to digest plants. Hadrosaurs were fairly widespread in the Jurassic, but will be even more so in the Cretaceous. They settled all over the planet, in Asia, Europe, and North America. In fact, it was in this region that a new specimen of the genus was discovered in 2021 by students at the University of Reading in Canada. Many types of dinosaur have already been found in the region, but this time, what makes this particular fossil so unique is its age, its state of preservation, and in particular, its fossilized skin. There's no doubt that these latter elements have a lot to tell us, especially since this Hadrosaurus is thought to be a juvenile. Paleontologists may also learn more about the growth and development of these dinosaurs. Let's take a look at our final group of ornithischian dinosaurs, the marginocephalans. The marginocephalans are a special clade of dinosaurs. Although they are all herbivores, they can be bipedal or quadrupedal. What they have in common is the narrow horizontal ridge of bone at the back of their skulls. This group was to develop more extensively in the following period, the Cretaceous. But some of its members can already be seen on the Jurassic Plain. One of the best-known groups of marginocephalans is the ceratopsians. They were the group's first members. They appeared at the end of the Jurassic in present-day China. Unlike their future descendants, our first ceratopsians did not yet have the famous ruff like that of the famous Triceratops. They have an armored body and a rostral bone in the jaw. This beak-like bone enables them to tear up plants with disconcerting ease. This jaw can be seen in action in Psittacosaurus, for example. Bipedal, it is the size of an antelope. Like our modern rodents, its teeth are self-sharpening. They wear down to create a sharp edge that can cut through the toughest plants. Despite its effective jaws for cutting plants, it is not yet very well equipped in terms of digestion. It must therefore use gastroliths to crush food in its digestive system. Many Psittacosaurus fossils have been found. In some cases, up to 50 gastroliths have been found. Paleontologists believe that these gastroliths may have been stored in the gizzard, the muscularized part of the stomach. Our Psittacosaurus closes the chapter on ornithischians. Now it's time to discover the member of the second dinosaur clade, the Saurischans. In the Jurassic, the Saurischans also largely continued their evolution. The branch led to birds. Within this group of dinosaurs, two main subgroups soon emerged: the theropods, mostly bipedal carnivores, and the sauropods, large quadrupedal herbivores. Let's start with the theropods, which underwent a meteoric diversification. As we saw earlier, many herbivores populated the Jurassic soil. Herbivores meant prey, and prey meant predators. While herbivores were numerous, carnivores were also widely present. One of the best-known Jurassic predators is undoubtedly the Allosaurus. Often confused with Tyrannosaurus, Allosaurus is one of the great predators of the Jurassic. It has a huge jaw, crenellated and curved teeth that enable it to tear flesh, and if it loses a few of them in an over-aggressive attack, they soon grow back. In addition to this extraordinary dentition, he also has short but robust forelegs. They are useful for grabbing prey and holding on tight. He also uses them to butcher his victims. The hind limbs are longer, but just as vigorous. They are also equipped with claws. Carnivorous and perhaps occasionally a scavenger, Allosaurus can also hunt in groups to attack large Jurassic herbivores. There's no stopping it. This bipedal dinosaur is perfectly equipped to be a top Jurassic predator, but it's not the only one to covet this position. Let's take a look at the Megalosaurus. At 7 meters or 23 feet long and 3 meters or 10 feet high, it's quite imposing. It was the very first dinosaur to be described and given a name. In fact, it means great lizard in ancient Greek. It has many of the same characteristics as the Allosaurus. These include short, clawed forelimbs, longer, sturdier hind limbs, and a crenellated, blade-like jaw. It was one of the most feared predators of the Jurassic period. In another genre, there are also dromaeosaurs, which began to emerge very slowly in the Jurassic, but would become more widely established in the Cretaceous. This time, we're dealing with a medium-sized carnivore. Its distinctive feature is that it is covered in feathers. At least that's what the latest research has revealed about it. It shares many characteristics with primitive birds. Body shape, feathers, legs, and the famous claw on the second finger are just some of the bird-like features. This group of dinosaurs brings us to the avian dinosaurs, such as Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is another type of feathered dinosaur. It has all the attributes of certain birds. However, its reptilian side cannot be ignored either, with characteristics that define it as a small bipedal dinosaur akin to a Compsognathus, for example. This strange bird is undoubtedly the one that makes the link between dinosaurs and birds. With its claws and long tail helping it to maintain balance, it can easily hunt insects and small animals. Speaking of small animals, isn't the Jurassic known as the Age of Giants? So what's really going on? If we look at the fossils of the largest known dinosaurs, a certain number can be placed in the Cretaceous period rather than the Jurassic. So why do we refer to the Jurassic as the Age of Giants? Is it a linguistic error? Misinformation? A popular misconception? No. The Jurassic can indeed be recognized as the era of the giants. The huge, long-necked sauropods were very numerous during this period, with a wide variety of species, justifying the term Era of the Giants. Let's go and meet them. Despite their immense size, we have nothing to fear. These giants are herbivores. Incidentally, to popularize the history of dinosaurs, the term herbivore has been used until now, but it's better to call them vegetarians. Grass didn't appear until the following period, the Cretaceous. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at these famous Jurassic vegetarians. The first one we're going to meet is a Diplodocus. According to scientific estimates, Diplodocus halorum measured 30 meters or 100 feet and weighed 24 tons. Its neck is almost 6 meters or 20 feet long, enabling it to reach food inaccessible to many herbivorous dinosaurs. It can reach the tops of trees, such as conifers, but it can also extend its neck and feed on aquatic marsh plants or horsetail beds. Its extremely long tail is also very useful. Made up of 80 caudal vertebrae, it acts as a counterweight, but can also be a powerful deterrent to predators. According to a hypothesis put forward by certain paleontologists, this massive tail also plays a role in courtship. To demonstrate their power, males would slam this giant whip to the ground. They estimated that the noise generated during these parades could have reached 200 decibels, a sound more powerful than a plane taking off at less than 100 meters or 330 feet. Diplodocus shares its territory with other gigantic animals, such as Bothria spondylus, another Jurassic mastodon classified as a sauropod, measuring almost 20 meters or 66 feet long. The Brachiosaurus genus is undoubtedly one of the best known to the general public. The full name of the genus's only species is Brachiosaurus altithorax. It too is one of the largest animals ever to walk the earth. It measures around 25 meters or 82 feet in length, and no less than 12 meters or 40 feet in height. Each of the vertebrae in his neck measures 70 centimeters or 28 inches, and he has 12 of them. Despite his oversized body, he has a small head. His guilty pleasure? The famous large trees we saw in the forest in the first part of the video, but also the cycads with their tender, tasty leaves. Despite its immense size, a serious competitor will soon be arriving in the Cretaceous, the Titanosaurus. After a long stroll through these Jurassic forests, it's time to see what's going on below sea level. The ocean is teeming with extraordinary creatures. Since the Triassic, the marine world has also undergone many upheavals. At first glance, terrestrial fauna is rich and diverse. But what about underwater life? Is underwater life also flourishing? Let's find out. In the heart of the Jurassic Ocean, of course, we find many of our famous shell animals, which form one of the bases of the food chain. Some of them are very special. We first encountered them in the Triassic, and they continued their reign of the shallows during the Jurassic. These are the ammonites. They are so numerous and diverse that scientists consider them to be stratigraphic markers. In other words, depending on the fossil species found, they are able to determine the age of the soil. Ammonites are therefore abundant in the ocean, providing a veritable food source for small and medium-sized predators. But ammonites are not always easy prey. At least some species, are undoubtedly difficult to attack by small predators. Indeed, paleontologists have unearthed an ammonite measuring almost 2 meters, or 7 feet in diameter. While these cephalopods are literally swarming all over the world's waters, they are far from the only ones to roam these marine territories. Predators are on the prowl. In the Triassic, we were able to see some great marine reptiles, such as the Nothosaurus. Unfortunately for them, despite their impressive power, they were unable to survive the crisis that marked the end of this period. The majority of the marine reptiles of the time, such as Hooposuchians and Thalattosaurians, suffered the same fate. Only one group managed to defy the climatic changes and geological obstacles imposed by nature during and after the Triassic crisis. It's the ichthyosaurs. Thanks to the latest discoveries by paleontologists, we now know that these marine reptiles were warm-blooded animals and that they gave birth to their young in the open sea. Skeletons of embryonic ichthyosaurs have been found inside the bodies of adult individuals, sometimes even in a position indicating that they were ready to give birth. Their size varied greatly from species to species. The smallest measured barely 1 meter or 3 feet in length, but the largest specimens could reach 20 meters or 66 feet. If they are often compared to dolphins, it's not just for their elongated snouts and sharp teeth, but for the similarities in their way of life. They are adapted to a pelagic lifestyle, but can also descend to the depths. They feed on fish and ammonites. Despite their formidable rise and great adaptability, the ichthyosaurs were to face stiff competition from the massive arrival of the plesiosaurs. Plesiosaurs were another major group to emerge in the Triassic, completing the large family of Jurassic marine superpredators. They have small heads, long necks, and bodies similar to turtles. They are also characterized by a short tail and 2 pairs of large fins. Plesiosaurus is a typical species of this order. It measures up to 5 meters or 16 feet in length. Its neck alone accounts for a large part of its length. Contrary to popular belief, its neck was not very movable. It was even rather stiff and unable to bend to feed, as swans, for example, can. It occupies more or less the same ecological niche as our Ichthyosaurus. In other words, it gradually took its place. It fed on fish and small prey, such as belemnites, animals belonging to the cephalopod clade. A fetus was found in one of the fossils studied, enabling scientists to confirm that plesiosaurs were viviparous. The female gave birth to just 1 offspring at a time. Guided by her maternal instinct, she took care of him during his early years, taking the time to teach him everything he needed to know, such as how to find the most beautiful belemnite specimens. This way, he could fend for himself later on in this blue immensity. The Pliosaurus is another of the most ferocious marine reptiles found in waters all over the world. It even terrorizes other marine reptiles, such as our Ichthyosaurus. Its jaws, armed with 130 sharp teeth, are enough to make the ocean tremble with fear. Long and razor-sharp, they kill with 1 clean stroke. Its size is matched by its formidable dentition. It could reach 13 meters or 43 feet in length. Its swimming legs, 4 powerful limbs propel it at high speed so that it can charge at its victims. The Pliosaurus is rightly nicknamed the T-Rex of the seas. Pliosaurs aren't the only ones to conquer the ocean. Crocodiles are also taking to the sea. To illustrate the crocodilian order, I suggest you discover Cricosaurus bambergensis. It lives in shallow seas, particularly near archipelagos, where it finds everything it needs to survive. Contrary to the image we have of crocodiles, whose ancestor it is, it shares some similarities with other aquatic animals, such as dolphins. In particular, it has a caudal fin and limbs that are more akin to swimming legs than to functional legs for terrestrial mobility. Rather voracious, reactive, and fast, it doesn't hesitate to pounce on squid or fish. During the Jurassic period, a new lineage of marine turtles appeared in the aquatic world. Fossil remains of sea turtles have been discovered in Bavaria, southern Germany. The Solnhofia parsonsi turtle. This isn't all that surprising when you consider that the region at the time was, unlike today, a kind of tropical archipelago. The sea was shallow and populated by sponge reefs of all kinds. While it's easy to recognize a turtle's silhouette, a few details show that they were not yet as evolved as our modern-day turtles. Their legs, for example, are not yet paddle-shaped, but rather finger-like. This means they can move more easily along the coast. Secondly, unlike our turtles, they are not equipped with the famous salt-eliminating glands. They do, however, have the same pointed snout and triangular head. Other species, notably those in the Plesiocheilus and Thalassemus genera, populate the archipelago. These turtles had to be wary of a powerful predator that roamed both fresh and salt waters. Hybidus lived in the same geographical areas as certain marine reptiles and crocodilians. While the latter was undoubtedly preyed upon by marine reptiles twice its size, this did not prevent it from finding plenty of prey to sink its teeth into. It is a durophagous predator, meaning that no hard shell or prey frightens it. It feeds not only on belemnites, but also on other small prey, thanks to its specialized teeth. Its teeth are wide and flat, designed to crush and crush. They move quickly with their well-developed pectoral fins, making them a rather active and voracious predator. To reproduce, hybidonts lay their eggs in the water. A sort of spiral egg case was attached to the marine vegetation by a small tendril. We'll now leave the aquatic world behind us on the images of this little chord of life and head for the sky. As we already saw when we looked at the Triassic period, the wide diversification of insects and their growing population in the forest heights, as well as the presence of large predators on the ground, favored the expansion of flying lizards. During the Triassic period, one of the first groups of pterosaurs, the Ramphorhynchids, appeared. Small in size, they were still quite primitive. But the Jurassic changed all that and shook things up a bit among these sky gods. Whereas in the Triassic we could admire Eudimophodon with a wingspan of around 1 meter, by the Jurassic, species such as Ramphorhynchus with a wingspan of 2 meters or 7 feet were appearing. But it's far from the only one to roam the skies. One of the largest Jurassic pterosaurs is Dirkgiakonath, with a wingspan of 3 meters or 10 feet. The Middle Jurassic also saw the emergence of a new family of pterosaurs. They are called pterodactyls. They can be distinguished from the more primitive pterosaurs by their shorter tails, absent fifth toes, and fewer teeth. They are generally smaller than our previous pterosaur specimens. Their average wingspan varies up to 1 meter or 3 feet in length, but some reached a wingspan of 3 meters or 10 feet in the Jurassic. These carnivores feed on fish, but also on small land animals on occasion. To help them in their predatory task, they are equipped with 90 small, fine, conical teeth. Large numbers of pterosaurs appeared in the Jurassic period. Although species diversified and developed even more widely in the Cretaceous, it is clear that they were beginning to make their mark on the Jurassic sky. If the pterosaur branch is diversifying to such an extent, it's because numerous niches among the sky gods are taking shape. To find their place, they had to adapt to their environment according to their needs. Pterosaurs come in all diets, insectivores of course, but also piscivores, filter feeders, and duraphages in the marine world, and carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores on the mainland. There are also changes on land, with new small mammalian animals. In addition to the ever-popular dinosaurs that marked the history of the Mesozoic, mammals also made a timid appearance as early as the Triassic and continued their slow evolution during the Jurassic. Indeed, amidst the thousands of dinosaurs, it's hard to find a place for mammals in the Jurassic living world. Nevertheless, mammals did not give up. Biological crisis or lack of adaptation, vacancies are forming in certain environments. One man's misfortune is another man's gain. These ecological niches were soon exploited by newcomers. During the Triassic, in the center of Pangea, the climate was rather dry, but following the breakup of Pangea, the climate became hot and humid. As a result, vegetation flourished, and as we've seen several times, lush jungles soon covered a large part of the land, benefiting a large number of animals: dinosaurs, reptiles, pterosaurs, but not only. Some species will adapt and take advantage of this particular environment to occupy a tropical and arboreal environment. These include small, arboreal animals such as the Shenshu and Jianshu genera, and mammals. Shenshu is a small animal measuring 18 centimeters or 7 inches, with a long tail of 20 centimeters or 8 inches and a weight of around 300 grams. Its prehensile tail is one of the features that led paleontologists to classify it as an arboreal animal. Snakes are reptiles. Their origins can be traced back to their history. This began towards the end of the Primary Era, around 340 million years ago, and developed during the Secondary Era, when many groups became extinct. While giant reptiles such as the famous dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and plesiosaurs did not survive, snakes did. In fact, they are a true evolutionary success story, numbering some 3,500 species today. By comparison, crocodilians number around 20, and turtles around 350. They have conquered the most varied environments, including deserts, marine environments, forests, and all continents except Antarctica. Their shape and their locomotor and dietary adaptations make snakes highly specialized reptiles. Could this success be due to the loss of their limbs, which gives them a considerable advantage by enabling them to move around in many different environments? Perhaps, but not only. The evolution of their skull skeleton has enabled them to capture very large prey, and the acquisition of a venomous apparatus is a significant advantage. It is undoubtedly in all these improvements that we find the reason for their evolutionary success. One of the oldest fossils attributable to reptiles dates back over 300 million years. This small animal, some 20 centimeters long, is depicted with a massive synapsid-type skull, found today in turtles. Synapsids gave rise to two main groups, synapsids and diapsids. The synapsids later became mammals. Among the diapsids are the ancestors of snakes. The oldest known diapsid dates back some 300 million years. Petrolicosaurus cancensis measures 40 centimeters or 16 inches. It is certainly terrestrial and insectivorous. This little lizard lived at the end of the Carboniferous period, when the planet's atmosphere was rich in oxygen. Forests were lush and predators were giants. He feeds on the small insects they unearth in the vegetation, but he himself is prey. He is to contend with predators such as Meganura, a giant dragonfly measuring 1 meter or 3 feet in length and 70 centimeters or 28 inches in wingspan. The Eurypterida, a kind of giant scorpion that could reach up to 2 meters or 6.6 feet in length for the largest specimens. The diapsids subsequently divided into two major groups, the archosaurs and the lepidosauramorphs. The first group includes dinosaurs and pterosaurs. Today, only crocodiles and birds, descendants of certain dinosaurs, remain. Lepidosauramorphs include pliosaurs, ichthyosaurs, and other placosaurs, which are aquatic animals, as well as lepidosaurians with sphenodontids, lizards, amphibians, and snakes. These last three groups are the most closely related animals and make up the squamates. Lizard morphology is highly varied. There are lizards with 4 legs and a long tail, and others with elongated, legless bodies. What all lizards have in common is that they have lost the lower temporal arch of their skull. Even burrowing species lack both arches. Amphibians are snake-like burrowing animals. They have a ringed appearance thanks to skin furrows and resemble large earthworms. With the exception of one species, amphibians have no trace of limbs or temporal arches. Snakes have lost both arches, have very elongated bodies, and are limbless. Their eyes have no mobile eyelids. Unlike amphibians, snakes are not ringed on the outside, but rather resemble apodid lizards. Snakes originate from the lizard amphibian family. Some groups of squamates are thought to be close relatives or ancestors of snakes. Since snakes have been found in fossil form for millions of years, their ancestry is not to be found, in any current squamate group. The challenge is to find the group that shares the same fossil ancestor with snakes. Amphibians have been suggested as the closest relatives of snakes among serpentiform squamates. However, due to extremely complex anatomical specializations, herpetologists have refuted this hypothesis. Among the groups of lizards that possess limbs, two groups have been suggested as possible ancestors of snakes: the varanoids and the skincomorphs. Among the varanoids are the monitor lizards, the heliderms, which are venomous lizards, and a very rare lizard called Lanthanotus, which lives in Sarawak on the island of Borneo. Their morphological characteristics, such as the structure of the skull, tongue, and mandible, as well as the type of tooth replacement, suggest that they may be directly related to snakes. What's more, they include entirely fossilized groups. Late Cretaceous mosasaurids are large marine varanoids, reaching up to 10 meters or 33 feet in length. Their limbs were transformed into fins, like those of dolphins. Dolichosaurids and Aegialosaurids, also Cretaceous marine varanoids, are also suggested to be close to the origin of snakes. All these animals have well-developed legs in common, which differs from snakes, but other Cretaceous marine fossils have led to the discovery of clearly serpentiform organisms. These include Pachyophysis and Pachyrhachis, which are more or less intermediate between varanoids and snakes. Some scientists even classify them in the latter group. Pachyophysis is a genus of snake that existed at the end of the Cretaceous. It belongs to the Cymeleophidae family. The Cymeleophidae family is characterized by hind limbs and a pelvic girdle. Pachyophysis is about 1 meter long, with a flattened morphology, and pachyostosis, a non-pathological condition characterized by thickening of the bones. Its skull is thin and pointed. Its jawbones are more reminiscent of lizards than snakes. Conversely, Pachyophysis' teeth are obviously snake-like. They are inserted into a bowl, like alveoli, buried in the jawbone, and are present over the entire jaw. The presence of backward-pointing teeth indicates a carnivorous diet and a prehensile rather than biting action. Its jaw structure enables it to grasp and swallow at the same time. It feeds on soft, rather small and slippery foods, such as marine worms. The specimen's vertebral articulation is very similar to that of a snake, but the construction of the vertebrae themselves diverges. Pachyophysis lives in shallow aquatic marine regions. It moves by undulating horizontal movements of its body. Its neck is more flexible, indicating that it can perform vertical movements, such as holding its head above its flat stature, a common posture for an animal living in shallow water. Pachyrhachis is a genus of snakes with well-developed hind limbs, including a hip, knee, and ankle joint. It is a surprising mixture of snake and lizard features, although its status as an ancient snake has been confirmed. The skull of Pachyrhachis displays most of the features derived from modern snakes. Its body is slender and elongated. It was a slow swimmer, and therefore an ambush rather than a pursuit predator. Its narrow head and neck enable it to reduce water resistance. but also to feed in burrows or narrow crevices. Other contenders for the title of snake ancestor are the skinkomorphs. They include a large number of tetrapod lizards, but also some snake-like species. Some herpetologists have speculated that they may share a common ancestor with snakes, since the structure of the brain has similarities with the latter. But the study of fossils has not confirmed this hypothesis. Another possible relationship has been suggested between snakes and Pygopodidae, lizards neighboring the geckos of the Australian region. They have very elongated bodies with no forelimbs and very reduced hind limbs. But this hypothesis has been disproved. It is now accepted that snakes are descended from lizards. Scientists are looking for their closest cousins among today's varanoids. One of the key questions that remains is how lizards came to give rise to snakes. 3 hypotheses have been put forward, with snakes descending either from terrestrial lizards, aquatic lizards, or burrowing lizards. The first hypothesis is that of terrestrial origin. Very recently, a study published by Zhiheng Li and his team in the journal Nature in 2022, and other earlier studies, suggest that the terrestrial hypothesis is still considered likely, as it is supported by the discovery of new fossils of primitive snakes that display terrestrial characteristics. Li's scientific paper describes a new fossil of a primitive snake, Eophis cf. Parvis, which was discovered in the Jiaotang Formation in China. This fossil has been dated to the Lower Cretaceous, around 125 million years ago. The second hypothesis of aquatic origin was put forward because Cretaceous mosasaurs, dolichosaurs, and aguilosaurs were close relatives of the snake strain. These aquatic and even marine varanoids never underwent significant limb reduction. This hypothesis, although not the most supported, is not totally rejected, as fossils that appear closely related to snakes have been found in fossiliferous deposits of marine origin. The third and final hypothesis, generally accepted, is that of an origin from a burrowing form. It is based on the burrowing nature of primitive snakes, but also on the fact that burrowing lizards are often serpentiform. Work on the snake's retina has fueled this explanation. The cranium of snakes is reinforced. All mobility between its various regions and those of protruding elements, such as the temporal arches, is lost. These elements explain the passage through a burrowing phase, since burrowing lizards show the same modifications. Nevertheless, the connection of the upper jaw and palate bones to the skull is not compatible with burrowing activity. The consolidation of the skull may well be the legacy of a burrowing past. Mobility of the upper jaw and palate was only acquired later. The elongation of the body and the loss of limbs are adaptations linked to the burrowing lifestyle, but also to the frequentation of burrows and crevices housing the small mammals on which snakes' ancestors fed. These last two hypotheses suggest that snake ancestors were half aquatic and half burrowing, living in mud like some modern, apodid amphibians. The early stages of snake evolution are still poorly understood. The first complete fossil found is that of Pachyrhachis. 1 meter long, it was serpentine, but also had reduced hind limbs. It is difficult to differentiate between a varanoid lizard with a very elongated body and a primitive snake. What all present-day snake species have in common is that they have limbless bodies capable of moving on the ground, in the air, and in the air throwing themselves from tree to tree. A Chinese charade fully describes the snake through a question: who runs without legs, swims without fins, and glides without wings? But how did snakes come to lose their legs? The evolution of limbs is generally linked to a type of habitat. In birds, for example, their wings began to evolve as they moved through the air. In the case of snakes, 2 hypotheses are put forward. According to the first, snakes lost their legs when adapting to marine life, while the second hypothesis maintains that this loss was due to an adaptation to subterranean life. In fact, their streamlined shape makes them easier to move around underground. Lizards and snakes dig their tunnels simply by pushing the earth with their heads. Legs just get in the way. According to recent research, notably that of the inner ear of Deinonychia, a type of primitive snake to which we'll return later, the most supported idea would be that the lineages that led to modern snakes lost their limbs when adapting to a subterranean life. This doesn't mean, however, that some Cretaceous lizards didn't one day decide to live underground and gradually lose their legs. Evolution is and always will be a random phenomenon. This new subterranean lifestyle reduced certain constraints on the genome of primitive snakes that were previously essential to their survival. Limbs and trunks were thus able to evolve, as demonstrated by the huge variety of fossilized snake types. The spinal column of snakes generally comprises between 160 and 400 vertebrae, whereas that of humans has only 33, and that of lizards between 25 and 100. The formation of this highly characteristic anatomical element has been studied through the embryonic development of vertebrates, and in particular, the stages leading to the formation of the spinal column. The blocks of cells that each give rise to a vertebra are called somites. It is from these that the head and trunk of membranous vertebrates are formed. At some point, these embryonic structures differentiate to form the various regions of the vertebral column, from the neck to the tail. In snakes, there is a gene specially named lunatic fringe, which is involved in the multiplication of vertebrae. Combined with other genes responsible for somite formation, the lunatic fringe will cluster cells at the caudal end of the embryo. Once a certain number of cells have been brought together, a somite is formed and moves up the body. The set of genes responsible for somite formation represents the molecular clock of somitogenesis. They regularly switch on and off to form somites. If this clock is ticking fast, more somites are produced from the same number of initial cells. And vertebrae aren't the only bones in the body to undergo atypical development in snakes. With the exception of the 3 vertebrae closest to the head and the tail vertebrae, all snakes have ribs. The ribs do not meet along the belly, so they can spread apart when the snake swallows a large prey. This homogeneous spine is thought to be the result of the transformation of the ancestral trunk configuration of ancient legged animals, perhaps even a specialization linked to the loss of legs. During the course of their evolution, snakes perfected several modes of apodous locomotion, i.e. limbless movement, as well as their prey gripping system. Their evolutionary success is indisputable. Vestiges of pelvic girdles and hind limbs can be seen in the most primitive of today's snakes, such as boas and pythons. These form small projections on either side of the cloaca, but are not used for locomotion. Snakes have adapted their locomotion to a wide variety of environments, which has contributed to their expansion. New joints between the vertebrae have appeared, and the intercostal and skin muscles have become specialized. The mouth, and more specifically the jaws, evolved in two different directions from a primitive stage. Scolosophids, with their small mouths, capture and ingest small prey. Elephanophids, which account for 90% of today's species, have large mouths, enabling them to ingest prey up to a size larger than their own. Because of their small size, Scolosophids fossilize very poorly, and scientists have little data on their past history. Elephanophids, on the other hand, are more easily visible. This adaptation modified the jaw skeleton, as well as the supratemporal and square bones, which are arranged differently in snakes. Elephanophids, which eat large prey, have developed an innovative mechanism not found in lizards and Scolosophids. A joint between the snout and the rest of the skull allows the mouth to be enlarged to the maximum. This enables them to swallow larger prey in one go. The evolution of lizards and the appearance of the first primitive snakes began during the Mesozoic era. This era is divided into three periods: the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. We are in the Triassic, just after the Great Permian extinction. The planet is empty. Some 90% of all life forms, both terrestrial and marine, have disappeared forever as a result of the catastrophe that caused the mass extinction. It was against this backdrop that the Triassic period began. The Earth stretches out like a vast virgin surface, waiting to be conquered. During the previous era, all the continents subjected to tectonic forces had coalesced into a supercontinent called Pangea. Pangea is surrounded by a vast ocean called Panthalassa, which contains all the seas. At the center of Pangea lies a totally isolated Paleocean called Thetis. Pangea is generally warm. No ice caps are in place to cool the planet. The coast is humidified by the ocean, while the interior remains dry. The Hercynian mountain range formed by the collision of Laurasia and Proto-Gondwana influences the climate of the supercontinent. The height of the mountains blocks clouds and causes precipitation. As a result, the climate on either side of the Hercynian chain is very different. It can be hot and humid due to cloud-driven rainfall, or hot and dry, since no clouds reach that side of the range, resulting in no precipitation at all. Fauna and flora thrive best on the northern slopes of the Hercynian chain. Rainfall is conducive to the development of vegetation, which in turn attracts animals. Mosses, gymnosperms, seed-bearing plants, ferns, and lycopods are timidly covering the planet, despite the catastrophe of the Permian extinction. Within a few million years, vegetation flourished again on Pangea. As for the fauna, many ecological niches were left vacant following the Permian extinction. The few surviving species will conquer them. Animals had to evolve and diversify to adapt to this new environment. New species appear. In the oceans, life returns to normal. Within a few thousand years, life was once again abundant. Marine reptiles take off. All this marine fauna remains essentially coastal. Only when Pangea had fragmented would it colonize the open sea. On land, the survivors spread. At the top of the food chain are archosauromorph reptiles. Some of these gave rise to the archosaurs, followed by the first pterosaurs, insect-eating flying reptiles. The archosaur line also produced the first crocodiliforms, which gave rise to the future crocodilians, and then the first dinosaurs. During the Triassic period, dinosaurs were not yet the giants we know today. One of the largest and most widespread Triassic dinosaurs is Plateosaurus. The largest specimens are around 10 meters long. Mammals are represented by Therapsids and Diconodonts, but they gradually declined as a cynodont branch developed. From the Therapsid branch emerged the first mammaliaforms, very close relatives of mammals. These appeared at the end of the Triassic, but diversified during the Jurassic. A small, discrete animal remains alongside all these animals. Megachirella, Watchleri, the only species of squamate terrestrial reptile in the Megachirella genus. It measures around 15 centimeters or 6 inches, has a rather robust broad skull, a slightly elongated neck, and long, sturdy front legs. Its general morphology is similar to that of today's lizards. This terrestrial animal may well be the ancestor of the squamates we know today. But if it is to survive, it will have to demonstrate great resistance and adaptability to the events that lie ahead. The Triassic saw the beginning of the breakup of Pangea, which continued throughout the Mesozoic era. A fault appeared at the foot of the Hercynian chain, fragmenting the continent. The waters of the Tethys Ocean, which until then had been contained within the heart of Pangea, rushed into this fault, opening up a vast passage of water that would later become known as the North Atlantic Ocean. Pangea split, giving rise to Laurasia and Gondwana. The Tethys Ocean is now much larger than it was before. Its warm, sun-drenched waters and shallow depths became a veritable paradise for marine life. Following the fragmentation of Pangea, volcanism became frequent, releasing large quantities of methane and carbon dioxide. Global warming followed, triggering a new planetary crisis. 80% of marine and terrestrial species combined disappeared. The Jurassic period opens on an unhappy Earth, depopulated of many species. On land and in the oceans, it was a veritable hecatomb. Nevertheless, the climate remained stable. allowing marine and terrestrial flora and fauna to thrive. And as in all mass extinction tragedies, the ecological niches left vacant will soon be occupied by newcomers. Since the division of Pangea, the climate has become warm and humid, and vegetation has developed abundantly. Lush green expanses cover a large part of the continents. This vegetation benefits herbivorous animals enormously. They grow, diversify, and become very numerous. As their appetite increases, so does their size. The Jurassic is known as the golden age of the great sauropod dinosaurs. The famous Diplodocus, the Brachiosaurus, and the extraordinary Stegosaurus populate the Earth's surface. The Brachiosaurus is a quadrupedal dinosaur with longer limbs at the front than at the back. Its femur alone is larger than a man's, measuring over 2 meters or 7 feet. Its immensely long neck is made up of a dozen vertebrae, each measuring up to 70 centimeters or 28 inches. It is particularly well suited to grazing on the leaves of tall plants. Its head can tower 13 meters or 43 feet above the ground, and its mass is around 20 tons. Brachiosaurus has crenulated teeth, whose flattened shape is particularly well suited to crushing plants. Brachiosaurs are social animals living in herds. These enormous herbivores gathered in the same place are not without displeasing carnivorous predators. While these predators were modest in size in the Triassic, they reached extraordinary dimensions in the Jurassic. The Allosaurus, a carnivorous theropod, could measure up to 12 meters or 40 feet from head to tail, and up to 4 meters or 13 feet in height. The name Allosaurus literally means strange lizard, due to the bumps on its skull. Thanks to its powerful muscles, it can run at speeds of between 30 and 55 kilometers per hour, 34 miles per hour. Its robust limbs are clearly adapted to hunting. It has very powerful claws, and the structure of its tail enables it to maintain balance in relation to its total body weight. Although it can't open its mouth wide, a muscle at the back of its skull gives it the strength to sink its teeth into its prey. The Allosaurus is a formidable predator. A new fauna now colonizes the air. Until now, only flying insects have roamed the skies. Now, many reptiles have joined them and are discovering the advantages of this precious food source. Dimorphodon and Rhamphorhynchus are true flying predators. Dimorphodon is a flying animal with an average length of 1 meter and a wingspan of 1.45 meters or 5 feet. Its body structure is fairly primitive, with a very small skull and short wings. The first phalanx of its wing finger is only slightly longer than its lower arm. Its neck, though small, is very flexible. Its wings, proportionately short in relation to its body, make it a poor flyer. As a result, it flies for short periods, as it is unable to travel long distances. A discreet little animal, it takes advantage of the abundance of vegetation. He's trying to make his way through all the clutter. It's Parvoraptor, a genus of snake comprising just one species, Parvoraptor estesi. 15 centimeters or 6 inches long, it has vestigial limbs showing that it was still in a transitional phase between lizards and snakes. In the seas, marine reptiles which had appeared in the previous period reign supreme. They include ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and pliosaurs. Plesiosaurs are large aquatic reptiles. Their long necks and 4 fins enabled them to paddle in oceans, lakes, rivers, and swamps during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. The term plesiosaur also includes pliosaurs. Their bodies are more hydrodynamic, with larger heads and shorter necks. The largest pliosaurs, such as Liapleurodon, are as fearsome as the great white shark. Thanks to its gustatory and visual senses, Liapleurodon locates its prey by swimming with its mouth open. Liapleurodon are well adapted to their environment. Its legs enable it to move swiftly through the water at great depths. Its front flippers push the water backwards, enabling it to propel itself. Plesiosaurs and pliosaurs, although they have marine lifestyles, are primarily lizards and must regularly come to the surface to breathe. Pliosaurs were at the top of the food chain at first, only to be supplanted by mosasaurs a little later. Ichthyosaurs are diapsid marine reptiles. They lived in the Triassic and Jurassic periods and disappeared at the beginning of the Cretaceous. They are relatively modest in size, except for some specimens, such as Shonosaurus, which reached up to 35 meters or 115 feet in length. Their powerful fins enable them to travel at speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour or 25 miles per hour. They feed on fish, ammonites, and belemnites, thanks to a long snout with sharp teeth. They have the morphology of today's dolphins and behave like them in that they can descend to great depths and leap back to the surface. Ichthyosaurs give birth to live, ready-to-swim young, rather than eggs, which is an advantage for their survival. Alongside these marine reptiles, cartilaginous fish developed, taking on the morphology of today's sharks. Crocodilians also evolved from archosaurs, just like dinosaurs. Several lineages of dinosaurs appeared during the Jurassic, surviving for the next 150 million years. The most important development was the appearance of the first birds. The Jurassic ended, and a new chapter in Earth's history began, the Cretaceous, during which snakes really developed and diversified. In the Cretaceous, Pangea is now divided into Laurasia to the north and Gondwana to the south. Laurasia also split into 2 parts. The North Atlantic Ocean appears, and the southeastern part is about to open up. Seen from the sky, the Earth begins to look somewhat familiar. The Earth still has no ice caps. The climate is generally warm. Sea levels are about 200 meters or 660 feet higher than they are today. Flora and fauna continue to evolve. Dinosaurs are the dominant animal group with the largest body sizes. They diversify and new groups appear, while others become extinct. Among them, the Tyrannosaurus appeared at the very end of the period. More commonly known as the T-Rex, this giant of 4 meters or 13 feet in height and 12 meters or 40 feet in length could weigh up to 7 tons. This bipedal super predator was at the top of the food chain, feeding on large herbivores. That's not going to stop the snakes from getting bigger and bigger in this environment that's so favorable to them. Flowering plants, the angiosperms, make their appearance. Alongside ferns and conifers, they will become dominant by the end of the period, thanks to insects. The vegetation is very welcoming to snakes, whose evolution is already underway at this time. Their bodies are already long and sinuous. Most still have reduced limbs, like Najash rheonegrina, but some have already lost them, like Dinolysia patagonica. Snakes now come in a multitude of forms, exploiting a variety of ecological niches. This evolution will also enable them to reach larger sizes. Dinolysia patagonica is the first known legless snake. It rubbed shoulders with the great dinosaurs that dominated the world at the time. It has no limbs, no shoulder girdle, and no pelvic girdle. This relatively large predator reaches up to 2 meters or 7 feet in length. The shape of its skull is reminiscent of that of the boidae and suggests that it was capable of consuming large prey. Dinolysia patagonica lives in desert environments. It is a terrestrial animal. This snake is closely related to the original ancestor of the crowned snake clade. Extensive study of its inner ear has demonstrated that it is equipped to dig burrows and receive low-frequency ground vibrations to detect predators and capture prey. Consequently, it is not equipped for aquatic life. There are significant differences between the vestibules of terrestrial burrowing specialists, those of non-burrowing terrestrial generalists, and those of aquatic forms. The vestibule of marine snakes and lizards has shrunk to almost nothing. In burrowing species, on the other hand, the vestibule is inflated like a balloon to improve hearing performance in subterranean environments. This trend is confirmed in all burrowers. The vestibule of Dinolysia patagonica is large and has the same balloon-like shape as those of today's burrowing snakes. It is almost identical to that of Xenopeltis, a type of burrowing snake from Southeast Asia that feeds on small rodents and other small snakes. Like Xenopeltis, Dinolysia patagonica hunts on the surface and burrows into soft ground for shelter. It is a carnivorous snake, feeding mainly on animal prey. Its extensible jaws and teeth are designed for grasping and ingesting animal prey. Because it lacks limbs, Dinolysia patagonica crawls and gains access to burrows and shelters of small vertebrates, such as other reptiles, small mammals, birds, and even fish. Its relatively large size enables it to hunt large prey. Dinolysia patagonica is a genus of primitive snakes closely related to the ancestor of today's snakes. It is not one of the first lineages to separate from the lizards, like Najash rheonegrina. Like many Cretaceous snakes, Najash rheonegrina has small bony hind limbs extending from the hip to the ankle. It moves easily on land thanks to its 2 legs, which also serve to hold on to its partner during mating. This snake has characteristics that our modern snakes no longer possess. The bone below the orbit has the same shape, position, and connections as the jugal bone of most lizards. This lower part of the jugal bone was therefore lost over the course of snake evolution to form a rod-shaped bone. The morphology of Najash rheonegrina bears a familiar resemblance to that of modern-day lizard species such as the Komodo dragon. It has a massive mouth, head, and body. But other representatives of the lizard-snake transition also roamed the Earth in the Cretaceous. Coniophis precedens is one of the oldest known fossil snakes. It lived 65 to 70 million years ago. It is one of the few fossils to represent the transition from snakes to their lizard cousins. Coniophis precedens lives in a floodplain environment and lacks adaptations for aquatic locomotion. This discovery suggests that creeping reptiles are terrestrial rather than aquatic in origin. It is small in stature, small in legs, and has a spine that reveals burrowing characteristics. Its jaws are more rigid and articulated than those of its modern cousins, but should already have enabled it to swallow large prey. It was at the end of the Cretaceous period that the Boidae appeared, dominating the world of snakes, especially in Europe and North America. Some of them reached record sizes for snakes. The Matsoidae are a family of giant snakes that can measure over 10 meters or 33 feet. Matsoid snakes are constrictors that resemble modern pythons and boas. Their jaw structure, however, is more primitive and much less suited to swallowing large prey. Members of this family have specific characteristics, such as the presence of a pituitary gland in the anterior part of the trunk, or the fact that the middle and posterior vertebrae of the trunk have a moderately or well-developed hemal keel. Among the Matsoidae, during the Cretaceous period, we find the genus Matsoia. It is represented by several species, the largest of which measures 10 meters or 33 feet in length. It's not just on Earth that snakes reach giant sizes. Another family related to the Boidae, the Paleophidae, represented by Paleophis, also reaches lengths of around 10 meters. These are all aquatic snakes that populate the Eocene seas. The smallest specimens of this family measured around 1 meter in length. Studies of Paleophis vertebrae reveal a high degree of vascularization. This suggests that the specimens had a much faster metabolism and growth rate than modern snakes. Eupodophis is a genus of marine snake that lived around 90 million years ago. It is rather modest in size, measuring 85 centimeters or 34 inches long, but has 2 small legs at the back, making it a transitional specimen between lizards and limbless snakes. The known species is called Eupodophis discoense. Its body ends in a short paddle-shaped tail. Its vertebrae and ribs are thickened as a result of its aquatic lifestyle. The pelvic bones are small and weakly attached to each other. Eupodophus discoense has hind limbs that, although small, are anatomically comparable to those of modern land lizards. These marine snakes share the aquatic environment with other marine reptiles. While the ichthyosaurs are becoming extinct, as yet unexplained, a new group is emerging, the mosasaurids. The mosasaur was a marine reptile that dominated the oceans at the end of the Cretaceous. With its crocodile-like appearance, it boasts heavy oval jaws. It can reach lengths of around 15 meters or 50 feet. Despite its large eyes, it has poor vision and olfactory senses. It has sharp teeth that enable it to cut up its prey so that it can eat it more easily, since its slender jaw means it can't swallow it all at once. Its scales are smooth and dark, and it has a fin at the end of its tail. In the air, species get bigger and bigger and are inexorably outcompeted by the first birds. Even on land, the race for gigantism is still on, and snakes, though massive, must be wary of new predators in the air. The skies are now dominated by animals with wingspans of up to 15 meters or 50 feet. Such as the Quetzalcoatlus. Quetzalcoatlus cohabitated with dinosaurs and is the largest flying creature ever to have existed. Its name literally means feathered serpent. This type of flying reptile belongs to the pterosaur group. Because of its size, it can be compared to a giraffe when on the ground. It averages 11 meters or 36 feet in length and weighs up to 200 kilograms or 440 pounds. The Quetzalcoatlus has two very pronounced pointed wings, giving it speed when it flies. Another advantage is that its weight is relatively low compared with its size, making it easier to climb into the sky despite its gigantic size. It has a long neck made up of numerous vertebrae, all interlocking with the folds of its wings. Its beak is slender, straight, and elongated. Because of its size, it is probably capable of hunting large prey, such as large fish, reptiles, birds, and perhaps even small dinosaurs or dead animal carcasses. Its long jaw and conical teeth suggest that it could catch and swallow whole prey in flight or on the ground. The Cretaceous period came to an end with the fifth and last of the mass extinctions. The theory most widely accepted by scientists is that of a meteorite impact preceding major volcanic eruptions at the Trap, Deccan, in present-day India. A celestial body from outer space crashed to Earth. Its diameter, estimated at around 10 kilometers, combined with the speed of the impact, caused an immeasurable explosion. Everything was vaporized for hundreds of kilometers at the very second of impact. Neither flora nor fauna were spared. Debris was propelled into the atmosphere and fell back to Earth, sparking numerous fires. The dust and gases emitted combine with water to produce acid rain, devastating everything it touches. In the seas, the plankton that form the basis of the food chain are wiped out. Dust in the atmosphere blocks out sunlight, plunging the Earth into a permanent night. As a result, temperatures plummet. Survivors are small animals with less need for food. The animals try to adapt as best they can to the new environment created by the catastrophe. Temperatures drop. Reptiles, which are cold-blooded animals, prolong their fasting and manage to survive. Other small omnivorous animals managed to adapt to the catastrophe and underwent a major evolutionary radiation: mammals. A new era began, the Paleogene, when the Cretaceous-Tertiary extinction had wiped out the species that had previously dominated the planet. A new age begins, the age of mammals, but not only. The surviving fauna will spread and diversify. Mammals that had hitherto lived in the shadow of the dinosaurs will become the planet's dominant group. The non-avian dinosaurs have all disappeared. Avian dinosaurs will continue to evolve and become the birds we know today. Flying reptiles and marine reptiles are no more. In the oceans, the situation is catastrophic. The majority of large predators have not survived, and fish will be able to take advantage of the ecological niches left vacant. The great reptiles have disappeared, but at the same time, other animals have managed to survive. Turtles, lizards, snakes, and crocodiles continue to evolve more serenely. How did snakes survive? The strength of snakes in this apocalyptic environment is their ability to survive without food for periods of up to a full year. At the same time, most species in the food chain are disappearing. Snakes are adept at hunting in the dark, which came in handy when the Earth was hit by a long, cold winter, as the sun was no longer able to penetrate the atmosphere. Snakes living underground in the forest or in water are the ones that fare best. Once the environment calms down, snakes emerge from their shelters and, to their great delight, have far fewer adversaries to contend with. They survive and spread all over the world. The impact of the meteorite had consequences for the climate. The clouds of ash and particles that spread through the atmosphere on impact are said to have spread across the entire planet, enveloping parts of the Earth in total darkness for over 700 days. Temperatures dropped considerably for several decades, from an average of 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit before the impact to 3 degrees Celsius or 37 degrees Fahrenheit in the years that followed. Then, over the next 1,000 years, the climate becomes tropical again. Temperatures rise again. The Earth now has many land masses. North America and Africa gradually saw their inland seas shrink. Shoals emerge and continental surfaces expand. India moves northwards, breaking away from Madagascar. Australia breaks away from Antarctica. Flowering plants cover continental surfaces. Tall trees such as redwoods now grow to form lush forests. This vegetation is a veritable paradise for animals. It offers shelter and food. In the oceans, the great marine reptiles are no more, and the cartilaginous fish, known as chondrichthyans, to which sharks belong, become true predators over the following millions of years. The actinopterygian, ray-finned fish multiplied to become the most numerous. During the Paleocene and Eocene, the Earth underwent a widespread warming episode. Surface water temperatures approached 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit at low latitudes, and 17 degrees Celsius or 63 degrees Fahrenheit near Antarctica. In addition to this generalized warming, a crisis occurred during the transition from the Paleocene to the Eocene, 56 million years ago. A hyperthermal episode occurred, known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. This event could be explained by a strong release of methane into the atmosphere, caused by the thermal destabilization of methane hydrates present in marine sediments. The temperature of the deep ocean rose by 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, an increase of 11 degrees Fahrenheit. The Arctic zone reaches temperatures in excess of 20 degrees Celsius, or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, to the extent that tropical species of phytoplankton thrive there. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum caused a major disruption of the carbon cycle. A biological crisis ensued, leading to the extinction of 30 to 50% of the microorganisms living on the ocean floor. However, other organisms also benefited. As temperatures rise, the environment changes completely. Pollen fossils of ferns and palms were discovered during drilling at a depth of 1 kilometer in Antarctica, along with fossils of crocodile ancestors. Fossils corresponding to a mangrove forest also remain at today's North Pole. The main orders of modern mammals appear at this time, but it was the cold-blooded reptiles that most benefited from this warming. Snakes need high temperatures to remain active. Average temperatures of between 30 and 34 degrees Celsius, or 86 degrees Fahrenheit, combined with a humid tropical environment, have enabled some snakes to reach extraordinary dimensions. Although they were already reaching impressive sizes by the end of the Cretaceous, the absence of oversized dinosaurs allowed them to continue to develop and grow even larger. One of the most famous genera of giant snakes from this period is Titanoboa. Its name literally translates as Titanic boa. The only known species today is Titanoboa cerrejonensis. Titanoboa belongs to the Boidae family, which consists of carnivorous snake builders found mainly in tropical zones. These include boas and anacondas. Titanoboa cerrejonensis was discovered in 2002 when scientists on an expedition to the Cerrejón coal mines in La Guajira, Colombia, discovered immense thoracic vertebrae and ribs. Other fossils were subsequently unearthed, for a total of 186 fossils, representing 30 individuals. Research continued for 2 years, and other giant reptile fossils from turtles and crocodilians were also found. All date from the Paleocene epoch, around 60 million years ago, just after the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction. The excavated fossils are being transported to the Florida Museum of Natural History for study by a team of international scientists. The vertebrae and ribs discovered belong to a new giant boidian named Titanoboa cerrejonensis. In 2011, a second expedition will be carried out in the same region to further investigate Titanoboa. 3 disarticulated skulls and parts of the mandible associated with the partial axial skeletons were discovered. Titanoboa is one of the few known fossil snakes with cranial material in good condition. True colossuses roamed the earth as giant snakes millions of years ago. But what did these giant creatures look like? And in what context did these snakes evolve? How did they evolve to such massive proportions? Titanoboa is the largest known snake in the fossil record. In boids, the increase in body size is due to larger vertebrae rather than an increase in the number of bones making up the skeleton. Titanoboa reaches a height of just over 14 meters, or 46 feet, with a diameter of 80 centimeters or 31 inches. It weighed around 1,500 kilograms, or 3,300 pounds, 4 times heavier than today's largest snake. Its skull measures 40 centimeters or 16 inches, and a modern man could stand upright in its open mouth. Titanoboa far exceeds the largest snakes on Earth today, from the green anaconda to the reticulated python, and even Gigantophis. Several specimens of this colossal size have been found, confirming that Titanoboa regularly reaches these gigantic proportions. Snakes, whether Paleocene or modern day, are poikilotherms. They have no control over their body temperature, which varies according to the temperature of their environment. This lack of control over internal temperature prevents snakes from being active during cold periods, as they conserve energy. Their size is limited and influenced by the outside temperature. When the temperature is too low, the animal has a slow metabolism that cannot support a body that is too large. During the Paleocene, in Colombia, where Titanoboa fossils were found, the temperature reached between 30 and 34 degrees Celsius, or 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Titanoboa is so enormous that it cannot support its own weight on land. It is an aquatic animal. It lives close to fast-flowing rivers, where freshwater turtles and crocodiles make up a large part of its diet. It thrives in the equatorial rainforest, where it can find plenty of food. One of Titanoboa's famous meals is Sarajonosuchus. This cousin of the crocodile is one of the giant snake's favorite prey. Its fossil has also been found in the Cerrejón Formation in Colombia, where Titanoboa's remains were found. Unlike Titanoboa, Sarajonosuchus is a small specimen. It is a crocodiliform that belongs to the group of modern-day crocodilians. Like Titanoboa, it thrives in a neotropical equatorial forest environment. While the evolution of reptiles tends toward gigantism, this one sticks to a rather reduced size. What's more, unlike its crocodile cousins with their long claw-like snouts, specialized in catching prey, Sarajonosuchus has a short, broad snout. Its diet consists mainly of amphibians, small reptiles, and mammals. Some scientists believe it is adapted by tapping into food sources that don't attract the other giant species it comes into contact with. Sarajonosuchus is easy prey because of its small size, and it must also beware of Carboniferous, This giant freshwater turtle measures around 2.5 meters or 8 feet in length, including 1.8 meters or 6 feet for its carapace alone. Carboniferous has an omnivorous diet. Its strong jaws and imposing size enable it to attack medium-sized crocodiles. While Titanoboa made its home in the part of the world that corresponds to present-day Colombia, giant snakes of the Madsoidae family remain on other continents. Gigantophis gastini is similar to a giant anaconda. This snake grows to over 10 meters or 33 feet and possesses considerable strength. Until the discovery of Titanoboa, Gigantophis gastini was considered the largest snake ever to have existed on Earth. Its shape and vertebrae are primitive. It lives near waterways and in areas of lush vegetation. It feeds on small mammals, but its size also enables it to attack large animals, such as the ancestors of elephants, the Moratherium. Although it looks rather like today's tapirs, the Moratherium is a mammal that belongs to the elephant group, as it shares many common anatomical features. The Moratherium measures around 3 meters or 10 feet in length and weighs around 400 kilograms or 880 pounds. It is smaller than today's elephants and occupies ecological niches currently taken by the hippopotamus, such as swamps and rivers. Moratherium feeds on vegetation. It does not have a trunk comparable to that of the elephant, but instead has a wide, flexible upper lip, enabling it to grasp hard-to-reach vegetation. Wanambi is a genus of large snake that lived in Australia during the Pleistocene. It measures between 5 and 6 meters, or 20 feet long, and has a small head. It stays close to water holes to catch its prey by surprise when it comes to drink. It then kills them by constriction, which means it wraps itself around its prey and suffocates them to death. Alongside him, Yarlungar also lives in Australia. This large predator used to grow up to 6 meters in length. It operates much like its sidekick, Wanambi, standing close to water holes to attack its prey and killing them by constriction. Other giants live alongside Wanambi and Yarlungar. Megalania prissa is a giant monitor that lives in Australia. It thrives in warm, dry areas, grasslands, savannas, and lowland rainforests. Its dimensions are impressive. It reaches lengths of 5 to 7 meters, or 23 feet, and weighs over a ton. It is one of the super predators of our time. Its morphology is reminiscent of today's Komodo dragon, only more massive. It wears a dark green, gray, or black color to remain inconspicuous in its environment and discreetly approach its prey. Its skin is reinforced with plates of small bones called osteoderms, forming a kind of chain mail. Its name has a Greek meaning gigantic wanderer. Thanks to its large size, it is not afraid to attack equally oversized prey. It has a long tail, which it can use in its attacks. Its many teeth and long curved claws at the end of its legs make it a formidable opponent. Giant snakes, as they appeared in earlier eras, no longer exist in our modern world. The circumstances of their disappearance remain a mystery. But what we do know is that while they may have some major advantages, their main weakness is their dependence on the climate. These creatures are dependent on the liquid element, ambient humidity, and high temperatures prevailing on Earth at the time. As soon as cooling and drying affect their environment, these giants are condemned to extinction. This extreme dependence on their environment and their low adaptive flexibility compared to other species proved fatal. However, the snake suborder has not disappeared altogether. They are just smaller in size. Even if a few specimens stand out for their length or weight, they don't surpass our famous Titanoboa. In today's world, 3 snakes stand out for their above-average length and weight. The reticulated python is a snake that lives in Southeast Asia. It is not only the world's largest snake, but also the longest land animal. It can reach up to 10 meters or 33 feet and weigh up to 140 kilograms or 310 pounds. It thrives in tropical rainforests and swamps. The reticulated python is an excellent swimmer that also enjoys aquatic areas. It is capable of eating large animals such as monkeys or wild pigs, but is also content with small mammals such as rabbits or rats or birds. Just behind the reticulated python, on the podium of longest snakes, comes the green anaconda at 8.5 meters or 28 feet in length. Despite its second place, it has nothing to envy the reticulated python, since it surpasses it in weight and can reach up to 200 kilograms or 440 pounds. Female specimens are heavier than males. The green anaconda is a constrictor snake with a predominantly aquatic lifestyle. It can remain in the water for 10 to 20 minutes without breathing. It hunts at night, leaving only its eyes and nostrils above the surface of the water. It thrives in the Amazon rainforest, climbing from tree to tree as the need arises. It is capable of swallowing large mammals such as tapirs and goats. The Saba python is Africa's largest snake. It reaches up to 7.5 meters or 25 feet in length and weighs around 100 kilograms or 220 pounds. It thrives in rocky areas and savannas, but also in aquatic environments. Like the reticulated python and the green anaconda, it feeds on both small and large mammals. It may even prey on hyenas or small crocodiles. Life on Earth never ceases to reinvent itself, to invent new scenarios and to surprise us. When a specimen is affected by gigantism and reaches abnormally large dimensions compared to its congeners or close relatives on the evolutionary tree, man always tries to understand why. Discoveries of giant snakes, like Titanoboa, are having a significant impact on research, contributing to our understanding of Earth's history. They provide valuable information about past biodiversity and demonstrate the astonishing plurality of life forms that may have existed in previous geological eras. These discoveries have provided even more information for the study of the evolution of these singular animals, leading to a global understanding of the origin and evolution of modern snakes. What's more, the discovery of fossils is always an invaluable source of data, providing new insights into the environmental conditions of the time. Scientists now know more about the food chains of the past, including these giant snakes as major predators in their ecosystems. Their existence strongly influenced the populations of other species that lived in the same regions as them. Giant snakes are still a source of fascination today. Their legacy is present in popular culture, and their study is important in understanding the history of the Earth. They play a fascinating role in myths and legends. Generally speaking, the morphological and biological characteristics of snakes give them a supernatural character. Even though they have no limbs, they are able to move quickly. They can be found on land, in trees, or in water. They can emerge at any time from underground hiding places. They swallow their prey in a single gulp and can inflict venomous bites. Snakes are very different from humans and other animals, so it's only natural that humans should classify them as strange and supernatural creatures. Would this not also be a reminder of nature's ability to fashion creatures as remarkable as they are mysterious?